Chapter 1, Prologue. Chapter Text. Being a shifter is the highest form of honor one can achieve in one's life. Everybody has a nature spirit connected to them, but only 1 out of 10 has the ability to connect with their spirit and fully transform into their spirit's natural form, earning them the title of shifter. Most spirits take the form of an animal native to your region. They are reincarnated spirits living again and again through their human partners. Dogs, deer, eagles, seals, wolves, crocodiles, tigers, bears, lizards, frogs, and so on. But there are those very special places in the world, where people take on the form of animals, who no longer walk the earth. Unicorns, chimeras, griffins and such. Only very few places have such a strong connection and lineage to those strong nature spirits and guardians. Hiccup's Island is one of those places. For as long as they can recall, Burke shared their bonds with the ancient dragon spirits. These dragons once terrorized the island, only for a Viking hero to join peace with the dragon, bonding Vikings and dragons together. And now the dragons are reborn within the people of the island, all up to the modern world we live in today. Most dragon shifters were centered around Burke, and then grew fewer and fewer as you moved away from the island and through what was nicknamed the Barbaric Archipelago, leaving room for other shifters on the nearby island and the mainland. One is often judged by what spirit animal you are connected with, and what talents and properties they are associated with. Even among the different dragon races on the island. Gronkles are large, friendly, thick-skinned and loyal. Zippelbacks are two-faced, snooky, tricksters and wild. Thunderdrums were loud, strong, stubborn creatures. Terrible Terrors, small, annoying, not very bright and comes in packs. Nadders, clever, fast and strong, and one of the most sought-after dragons, on pair with the likes of the monstrous Nightmare, large, strong, protective, and maybe a little slow-witted, but they would never admit it. All character traits that were reflected in their human partners. Each dragon lived as a part of you, a second voice and person inside you. Your soulmate and second half. Your dragon gives you inner strength and even loans you their physical strength. You could be able to sprout claws and fangs, borrow their strength to lift heavy objects, or their speed to move fast if necessary. Some even grow wings and fly. The really talented ones, the shifters, are in complete harmony with their dragons, and are even able to make a full transformation, lending their bodies and minds, to fully transform into a dragon on command. A true show of strength of character, and every Viking mother hoped and prayed that their offspring would be blessed by a big large dragon, able to make a full transformation. That being said, spirits have minds of their own. It is like living with a completely different being inside your head, and if you don't get along, the spirit could tear you apart from the inside, succumb to their primal needs and take over one's body, without a trace left of the person who had once been there. Having a spirit soulmate doesn't always mean they are a total reflection of yourself either, or even the same gender. Though it was most normal that your spirit was the same gender as you, it was not always the case. Hiccup's male friend Fishlegs' dragon was a female gronkle named Meatlug. Even Hiccup's own mother bonded with a large male storacutter. Families are also not always an easy matter. Romantical partners would not only have to be with each other, but also be accepted by each other's dragon spirits. Most couples were attracted to partners with spirits in the same class and race as themselves, and even their spirits sometimes formed couples to match their partner's romantic interest. There exists libraries worth of books and movies of love stories that have been written where the protagonist finds true love, because their nature spirits are mates. But there are exceptions. Hiccup's parents loved each other from the moment they met. They loved each other so strongly, deeply, and the thought of being without one another was unbearable. But they could not stay together as their spirits despised one another. Hiccup's father's dragon Skullcrusher and Hiccup's mother dragon Cloudjumper could not and would not get along. If Hiccup's parents were together for too long periods of time, they would both sprout scales, and their dragons would come to the surface. Cloudjumper and Skullcrusher would tear each other apart as natural enemies, despite the deep love Stoic and Valka held for each other. Staying too long in the same place, the two dragons' feral nature would take over, and completely transform their humans and fight it out as dragons. Both dragons, too stubborn, too vicious, proud and too blind to care about their humans' affection. That had only happened once before, and Burke was still missing a large part of forest, deemed inhabitable, after the fight where the two dragons shook the island. So Hiccup's parents were still married, but did not live together. They could not even be on the same continent after their fight. So strong was Skull Crushers and Cloud Jumpers' animosity against each other. The two dragon species Rumblehorn and Stromacutter were not natural enemies, so one figures it must have been a grudge from previous incarnations, that the humans no longer remember, but their dragons do. The fact that Valka and Stoic managed to have a child together was a testament to their love, and the strength of the bond they have and hold with their dragons. Both were full-flesh shapeshifters, formidable dragons partners in their own right, each with such rare, strong and skillful dragons as their partners. Valka now lived outside Berk, pursuing her passion for wildlife preservation and wildlife photography, while Stoic stayed at home with their son Hiccup at Berk as chief of police. Each living out their own dream, but only able to see each other a couple of times a year for brief periods of time. Even the sound of Valka's voice would make Skullcrusher react, so most of the couple's communication was through emails and letters, depending where in the world Valka found herself. Despite that, their love never wavered, they never sought other romantic partners. They were fully devoted and committed to each other. Being able to use your dragon's gifts is a high accomplishment, but in modern society most kept their claws and fangs hidden, and it was considered highly impolite and inappropriate to transform in public for no reason. Talents are still part of everyday life, but used with care. Still there are those who use their talents for their own gain, in illegal and nefarious ways, and if caught, are punished heavily for it. Talons removed, wings cut to name a few for illegal and dangerous use, but only the severe and extreme cases. Most people see their talents and their spirits as an extension of themselves, and a help in everyday life. A way to live life more peacefully and effortless in the modern era, where you don't have to fight for rank with teeth and claws. Still, as you grow up, you learn and become acquainted with your dragon, and learn how to control your transformation and your gifts and talents. It was quite normal for kids to spout fangs, wings and tails simply because they were kids, and could not control their powers yet. It was a bit different when you were a teenager. As teens, you were encouraged to test your bond and abilities with your dragon, to see how far both of you could go. Therefore being able to sprout fangs or breathe fire on command was a statement of progress and power of the bond. So of course teens misused their power as much as possible. Hiccup's school and its students were no exception. In Hiccup's class, the twins would use their Zipleyback's gas and sparks to blow up the chemistry lab for a prank. Astrid would sprout scales and shoot Nada spikes if she was angry enough. Snotlout thought he had higher use of his monstrous nightmares powers, and used his dragon's abilities to improve his football game, cheat in school, hit on Astrid and make Hiccup's life miserable. One time Hiccups was drinking from the water fountain in the school's main hallway next to his locker, when Snotlout sprung forth, claws and fangs on display, scales scattered across his face and arms, horns growing from his hairline and yellow eyes with slit pupils to scare Hiccup. Hiccup jumped back in terror, fell over his own feet and spilled water all over himself, to Snotlout's great pleasure. Hiccup could still remember the whole hallway laughing at Hiccup's humiliation and congratulating Snotlout for such a great show of his talent. At least he was not punched that day in Snotlout's pursuits to try out his dragon's talents. Hiccup's school encouraged such behavior and use of dragon's powers. Their goal was to make as many of their students full-blown shifters, that could go out in the world and be assets and ambassadors of Berk's great dragon's heritage. So Hiccup was often lifted, shoved, pushed, lit on fire, bitten, scratched, punched and kicked, all with encouragement of the faculty for their student body to push themselves and their ability. The most competent shifters would go on to live successful lives, and be given more profitable job offers and future opportunities based on their shifter status. Then of course there were the rare people. Those born without a spirit. Born alone and without a soulmate. Those who would never know what it would feel like to talk to another being in your own head. To feel the strength and power and support they gave you. They would be forever alone. People born soulless. Like Hiccup. Spirits and especially dragon spirits started showing signs of their connection in early childhood, and then fully presented somewhere around age 10 to 13. Children dream and fantasies about what type of dragon they were paired with. How big were they? How strong? What cool powers were they gonna get? As little, Fishlegs, Snotlout, Astrid and the twins, Toughnut and Roughnut had been friends with Hiccup. But while the others started hearing voices inside their own heads, grow scales and fangs, Hiccup felt nothing. As time went by and Hiccup showed no signs of inhabiting a sprint, neither dragon or any other type of kind, his friends left him. They did not have time for a soulless, who could not keep up with their newfound strength and speed. The worst part was Hiccup's father. Stoic had always bragged about how strong Hiccup's dragon was gonna be, with such a strong heritage from both his mother and Stoic himself. The Haddocks could trace their roots back to the original Berk Vikings, and even the chiefs of the old Viking village, making their connection and the chance to attract a powerful nature spirit even larger. What wonders of strength Hiccup would accomplish as soon as his dragon presented itself. It didn't matter that he was small now. He would grow with his dragon. But no dragon ever showed its head, and Hiccup never presented. He remained gangly, thin, pale and weak. With no dragon partner to connect over, Stoic grew distant from his son. He loved his son. He was the most precious thing to Stoic on this planet. He just had no idea how to communicate or connect to his small, fragile and clumsy son. With no supporting father, an absent mother, no friends and no dragon spirit, Hiccup decided to sharpen his other abilities. He worked harder, studied harder, all to sharpen his wit and mind, making up for being the smallest in the room. He took up working in his uncle's garage, as his father no longer took him with him in his police car. In the garage, he created and designed trinkets and gadgets in the workshop, trying to build up his strength. He even started to draw to get some kind of creative outlet for his frustrations. Sharp mind, small body and a sarcastic tone. That was Hiccup. He knew how he was, even if the whole world and his father looked down on him for not having a dragon partner. Hiccup was fine with being alone, until the day he wasn't. One morning in his 15th year, he opened his eyes and felt it. The other presence in his mind. His other half. He felt the dragon move in his mind. Slick and smooth, with strong large wings able to carry him farther and faster than he could imagine. Black as night with intelligent piercing green eyes that bore into Hiccup's mind. The creature smiled at Hiccup, purring his name. Hello, Hiccup mumbled to himself. No, not to himself anymore. Toothless. Chapter 2, You're Welcome. Summary. Hiccup wakes up with a dragon in his mind and have to deal with it. Notes. Chapter Wanings, a bit of violence and bullying. Little bit of blood. Mentions of child abuse. I promise it will get better. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Hiccup took in the large brick building in front of him and gulped. Behind him his father closed the car door with a smack and wished him a good day, then drove off in a hurry, not to be seen in the company of his son. Hiccup looked longing after the safety of the large police SUV that was disappearing around the corner. Around him other teenagers were being dropped off, or driving past him in their cars to find a parking spot behind the school. Hiccup looked around, hiked up his shabby backpack and walked into school. He kept his head down and speed-walked to the locker to get his things before class. He fought the urge to pull his tattered green hood over his head. He hadn't looked when he got dressed this morning. Just grabbed the nearest pair of pants, a random dark band t-shirt and a dark red plaid shirt on top, too obsessed about the dragon in his mind to care what went on his body. What he could not go without was his old green hoodie with the faded hairy hooligan logo on the back, that had been a gift from his mother a couple of years back. It had stopped smelling like her a long time ago, but it still brought him some sort of comfort, despite its worn-out state. He tried not to think about it, but everything suddenly seemed overwhelming and constricting. His scene seemed in hyperdrive, his throat was tightening, vision blurred and he was sweating buckets. He fumbled with his lock with clammy hands. Around him people were looking at him. Were they looking at him? Do they know? Can they tell? Do they know what happened? Do they know that he was no longer soulless? Was it their dragon's senses? Was it his? Did he smell? Oh gods, he should have stayed in bed and never shown his face. He could feel a tingling sensation right under his skin, like something aching to come out. He gasped with fear as he saw small scales protruding from his hand holding his lock. With a start, he quickly covered it with his other hand, looking around to see if anyone saw. A girl with a blonde ponytail gave him a disgusted look, but then went back to the conversation with her friends, ignoring Hiccup's existence entirely. Hiccup blinked and looked around. All around him people were occupied with their own stuff. No one was noticing him. He was safe. He felt rather than heard the light rumbling chuckle through his body from Toothless. The dragon didn't have a real voice, so it was more barks, roars and humming, than an actual voice. But Hiccup and Toothless didn't need words to understand each other. A soothing calming sensation flowed through Hiccup's body, as he realized that Toothless was soothing him. Enveloping in a calm, comforting blanket of support, in some kind of dragon hug. Hiccup was still not quite sure what kind of dragon Toothless was, but he felt larger than his own scrawny body, as he was enveloped in the hug. Hiccup relished in the support and comfort. Nobody had ever talked about the feeling of a dragon. Only the powers and strength. Nobody told him it would be like this. His locker's door smacked closed in his face, after he just managed to open it. Hiccup just managed to save his fingers from the door, before Snotlout's face loomed over him in a grin that did not bode well for Hiccup. Hiccup shivered involuntarily. "Hey, a cause." Snotlout greeted with a drawl. Hiccup gulped and turned to him. "Hi Snotlout," he said carefully. Normally he would be ready to reply with a snarky remark that would earn him a punch, but today he was too on edge to come up with a good comeback. Snotlout was also surprised, it was clear on his face, as he was ready at the slightest excuse to punch his cousin. The twins waiting behind Snotlout also seemed confused, sending each other identical looks of astonishment, before finding their usual wicked grins. Snotlout shook it off and pounded his fist into Hiccup's locker, making Hiccup flinch, and the whole hall turned their attention towards them. Snotlout jeered, and the twins chuckled, enjoying watching Hiccup squirm. "What's the matter with you today, useless? You seem quite jumpy. You scared me?" No, I have no idea what you're talking about." Hiccup tried to hide his nervousness and at the same time hide his scale-covered hand, but Snotlout picked up on his uneasiness. Yes, you do." A grin stretched over his face, shoving off a single fang. At this point Snotlout had normally gotten one good punch in and then left Hiccup to go on with his day, but of course nothing was easy today. "What would I have to be scared about?" Hiccup laughed a little hysterically. The twins' grins widened. Rough Nut cracked her knuckles. "Yes, there is nothing to be scared about." Snotlout agreed, slowly turning away from Hiccup only to turn on him again with enhanced dragon speed. The metal of his locker was cold, when Hiccup was smacked against it, and the lock was digging into his back. Hiccup gripped his backpack in front of him, in hopes he could use it as a shield, and that Snotlout would avoid his face. Snotlout gloated, and the twins laughed again. Some of the bystanders also laughed at the display. For them this was normal. They healed fast, and hit harder. Nobody got hurt from being thrown around a bit, if it meant being closer to being a shifter. They all seemed to forget that Hiccup is soulless and did not have the same built-in defense system. Was soulless. Snotlout barked out loud. "Look at your stupid face, all scared and tiny." Around them more and more people laughed at Snotlout's taunt, and soon the whole hallway joined in with Snot and the twins snickering, while Hiccups tried to disappear into the ground. Gee, it wasn't even 8:30 yet. What a way to start the day. "Please, cut it off, Snot." Hiccup tried, desperate to get away. He could feel Toothless' restlessness, not knowing what the dragon was doing, but his whole arm itched and his heart thumped in his chest. What was that? Snotlout lifted a hand to his ear, like he could not hear what Hiccup was saying. "Please stop." Hiccup tried again, louder this time. "I don't think I heard your puny voice. Speak up, useless." Around them people grinned and snickered, enjoying Hiccup's pathetic try, while Snotlout ignored his plea. "Oh, well, I didn't hear any protest, and I don't like the way you looked at me today, so." Snotlout lifted his fist, and Hiccup flinched against the locker, knowing what was coming. One moment in maniac impulse, because Hiccup should know better, Hiccup looked up from behind his backpack and locked eyes with Snot. A warm defiance washed over him. A challenge. Snotlout froze on the spot, eyes winding, fist raised, his whole body locked. He grunted, but was completely locked in place. He gritted between his teeth, but his muscles would not move. The twins halted their laughter and the rest of their onlookers also paused, looking confused at Snot's hesitation, unknown about his struggles. Hiccup felt his breath hitch, not knowing what to do. He was luckily saved by Fishlegs, the usual lookout, who came running down the hall, to warn them. "Teacher!" He warned breathlessly from running, and the students scattered like a pack of terrible terrors, returning to their lockers, and on their way to their class. Hiccup forced his locker back open, grabbed a random handful of books and ran, all while Snotlout was still frozen in place. He ran to his next class. Behind him he could hear the twins poke the still stiff Snotlout, while Fishlegs looked on with confusion. Hiccup threw himself in his seat and pulled the hoodie over his head to hide. What was that? A couple of kids filtered in and gave him a look, and Hiccup tried to sink further into his seat. A satisfied hum spread from his heart. Hiccup could tell the meaning. "You're welcome." "No, no, no. Not you're welcome. That was bad, very very bad. They were supposed to lay low. Not flaunt their new bond and dragon powers first thing in the morning. No. Not welcome. Bad. Very bad, bad, bad dragon." He could feel Toothless' confusion. His dragon protected him, why was Hiccup not grateful? Guilt overwhelmed Hiccup, and he was not sure it was his own or his dragon's. Hiccup was grateful not to be pounded against a locker first thing in the morning, but that was not the way to do it. What was that even? Toothless didn't answer. The teacher entered, not sparing any of the students a glance, and Hiccup pulled off his hoodie to focus on the whiteboard. As the class progressed, Hiccup could feel the waves of Toothless trying to soothe Hiccup's frying edges. He was grateful for the effort, but he was still trying to figure out how they were gonna survive the rest of the day, all while still lying low. Hiccup could feel the whispers as he walked back to his locker, shoving his books in, and ran to the smaller one of the two cafeterias to get some food, before Snotlout tracked him down. He normally used the large one of the two cafeterias, so hopefully it would throw his cousin off his scent. It felt weird to be at his locker, like he was returning to the crime scene. He heard everything as he walked. Like his senses are responding to his need to know everything. It was only when he sat down behind the cafeteria building next to the bins, taking a deep breath, that he became aware of what had happened. Toothless reacted to his distress by extending his dragon scenes to Hiccup. Sitting behind the building, Hiccup could feel everything. He could hear the cooks argue inside the kitchen from the open window above him, and smell all the spices they added to the mystery meat, smell the bacon fat frying on the grill. He could hear the two girls sitting far away talking about texting the boys they liked. He could hear the baseball bat hitting the railing in front of the building, as its owner ran down the stairs to join his friends at the bottom, on their way out to have lunch on the green. He could hear and see every group and gathering eating out on the green in front of the cafeteria. If he focused, he could zoom in on each individual conversating, drown out the surrounding ones, while focusing on the speaking face. His eyes felt weird, and he was pretty sure that his pupils had changed into slits to accompany his dragon sight. "Is this what you see?" Hiccup wondered, in awe of the dragon's magnificent hearing, smell and sight. A low confident hum filled him, and Hiccup could not help but grin as well. He sat there for a moment, just focusing on shifting his senses at will. To hone them in and focus their attention. To stretch them, see how far he could hear, smell and see, while hiding behind the bins. To focus on a group further away than the others, where two boys were resting in the grass, claws, teeth and scales out, while the friends cheered them on. Then shifting to the group sitting on the picnic tables showing off their phones to each other. One was having a tuna sandwich that was going bad, one painting her large dragon claw nails pink, where Hiccup could honed in so he could see the small specks of glitter in the polish. Then back to the skater kid that tried to show off a flip to his friend, using his extended dragon claws to make it easier to hold the board. Of course, because Hiccup kept focusing on things so far away, he didn't notice until too late as Snotlout pulled him up by the collar of his jacket. "What the hell did you do to me?" He shook Hiccup forcefully, while the rest of his friends gathered around them. Hiccup could feel his dragon's senses failing with the interruption, and his head spun from being snapped out of the meditative state so quickly, while trying to focus on Snotlout as he was being shaken. The twins elbowed each other with a grin bigger than the other, ready to join in if Snot needed them to. Fishlegs kept his distance, but his face was hard. A bit away Astrid Horferson stood watching her friends with crossed arms and an annoyed look, as she kept looking at her watch, bored with the whole thing. I didn't do anything. Hiccup struggled against his assailant, only to suddenly be held still as Snotlout leaned in menacingly. Well, what do we have here? Hiccup froze as Snotlout studied him. Is that dragon eyes? Have you finally bonded with a spirit? The twins pushed each other to see what Snotlout was talking about, cursing at each other for getting in the way. Fishlegs came closer, a surprised murmur hung from his mouth. Astrid held her place, annoyance still clear on her face, but her left eyebrow had risen in interest. Yes, it is. Snotlout used one hand to hold Hiccup against the wall, while the other pulled at the edge of Hiccup's eye to better see the slit dragon pupils. Well, I be damned. Snotlout said triumphant, and let Hiccup fall to the ground with a grunt. You're not that useless after all. So what kind of dragon are ya? Snotlout wondered, calculating, sizing Hiccup up and down, his own pupils turning into dragon ones to better access Hiccup's newfound talents. When he didn't immediately find one, or a big change in Hiccup at all, he pushed his cousin once more to see if his dragon would do something. I'm not. Hiccup kept blinking until he could feel his eyes return to normal. Don't lie to me. I know what I just saw. Now, what kind of dragon are you? Hiccup just kept shaking his head, as Toothless hissed in his mind. Was that some dragon trick you pulled at me, huh? Snotlout pushed Hiccup once more, Hiccup flinching each time. Is that why Hookfang froze? There was a shrill to his voice. An uncertainty and nervousness it did not normally possess. I don't have. Hiccup was pushed again. I bet is some kind of small prophetic dragon that he is too ashamed to admit. Roughnut smirked, tilting her head. I bet it is a terror. A teeny tiny terror. Toughnut laughed. The twins high-fived. Hiccup just shook his head, unable to do anything. A terror, ha. Snotlout stepped back and laughed, like all the pieces just fell into place in his mind. I bet that's why Hookfang froze. He was so shocked that even a terror would end up wanting to be a partner with such a scrawny, useless little imp like you. Snotlout sneered and laughed more wholeheartedly this time, and his friends joined in. Only Astrid stood behind, rolling her eyes, clearly feeling like she was wasting her time. Hiccup could feel Toothless trying to crawl his way out to the surface to rip Snotlout in two. His blood boiled, and his teeth and nails itched to claw and tear. His back and tailbone itched too, but Hiccup just kept his head ducked and begged Toothless to keep calm. To wait it out. They would get tired and leave him alone. It would only make it worse if he fought them. Please, please Toothless. He abruptly and unkindly was yanked back up. Toothless hiss turned into a snarl in his ears. Please Toothless, Hiccup begged his dragon. Snotlout loomed over him, even though Hiccup was bordering on being taller than him. Sorry man. I have a reputation to uphold. Snotlout said with a grin. Then Hiccup bucked over in pain by the fist in his gut. Toothless wailed on the inside, but kept his claws inside to Hiccup's relief. After he had sunken down on the ground, his cousin got a kick in for good measure. Nothing too serious. Snotlout was too pissed off, all things considered, so they left laughing. Unfortunately, his boot had hit Hiccup's chin at some point. They left Hiccup to himself, blowing up a storm about how even more pathetic Hiccup was now that he had a terror for dragon partner. Soon the whole school would know that Hiccup had presented with a terrible terror for a partner. Hiccup sat up against the brick wall and cradled his injured lip, tasting blood. He rolled his shoulders, feeling out the muscle. All things considered, he was pretty okay. Hiccup figured that Snotlout's father Spitaloot was out of town, giving Snotlout a break, making him in a better mood. The worst poundings Hiccup had received was when Snotlout himself had spotted bruises inflicted by his father's bad mood. Hiccup knew that Snotlout only went after him, because his father had told Snotlout to do so. Snotlout only took out his frustrations out on Hiccup, after his father was done inflicting his frustrations on his son. The thought comforted Hiccup a bit. It did not make it better and justified, but it helped. At least Snotlout had stopped using his dragon's talents on him. But that had only happened after Hiccup did not sprout his own set of claws to fight Snotlout head-on, like normal Vikings boys did at that age. All dragons fight, Spitaloot reasoned. It was Hiccup's own fault he was not man and dragon enough to fight back. Snotlout had looked conflicted about it at first, but now it was just routine. The twins had joined in because they thought it was entertaining. Their trickery Zipliback, which they shared, had an infinity for chaos. They needed a focus to gather on, as sharing a dragon meant sharing the dragon's mind, but sometimes each other's as well. That made them a bit manic, with no outlet to focus on. They were the first ever case of a pair sharing a dragon recorded, and no one knew what to do with them. They got away with more trouble than most because if they didn't pull pranks, or hit something once in a while, they would claw each other's eyes out in the literal sense. People were so afraid they would go feral and then the town would have a hysterical and dangerous Zipliback on the loose. Fishlegs just stood back and cheered on. Hiccup knew that he was afraid Snotlout would turn on him. Better Hiccup than Fishlegs himself. Hiccup had sadly come to terms early with his role, as the others grew their talents, and Hiccup grew none. He could not keep up, and was therefore an outsider. One that could not be trusted, Spitaloot meant. Even if Hiccup had got a dragon now, it was too late. Even if Toothless turned out to be a monstrous nightmare, there was no way he would be welcomed back into their fold. It would take a miracle. Hiccup spit out a glob of blood and spit, and tested his shoulder again. Toothless snarled in his mind, and Hiccup had to agree a little bit. But it would not help to go all dragon on his cousin. Snotlout had years of dragon experience on him. Hiccup had mere hours. Even though Snotlout, the twins and Fishlegs did not have the same academic flair as Astrid, who was top of everything she did, they were all still friends despite their obvious differences. Their dragons formed a strong pack and were naturally drawn to each other, making them still hang out and be friends, even if life was pulling them in different directions. Snotlout was going the football route as his father expected of him, but was failing his classes, which his father did not appreciate. Fishlegs was getting good grades, but he kept himself back to spend more time with his friends. Nobody was entirely sure what the twins were doing most of the time with a mind like theirs. Besides being the top pranksters of the school with the record in the detention, they didn't seem to have a plan. The fighting was not punished, but encouraged and simply just a part of life on Berk. With so many teenagers and hormones gathered in one place, and then you added dragons on top of that, fighting was inevitable. That school tried to keep everything in order and offered sports where the kids could use their powers. Hissing and claw fights were part of life. Hiccup had accepted it. Being soulless and in no way able to protect himself, he kept his head low, and only managed to attract Snotlout's attention and his dragon's outlet, because of their shared history. Hiccup looked up as a pair of boots with fur trimming stopped in front of him. He looked up to see Astrid glowered down at him with a first aid kit outstretched in her hand. Hiccup felt like his eyes would pop out of his head of pure shock and surprise. Astrid huffed, trying not to look at him, but she was sprouting scales on her neck and up her chin, that puffed and flushed like ruffled feathers. She looked uncomfortable, ruffled, annoyed, but most of all she looked frustrated. If Hiccup squinted, he may be able to see the hint of pink that dusted her cheek. Huh. That was new. Of all his old friends, Astrid and him had the most complicated relationship. As kids they had been friends, and in periods the best of them. Then Astrid grew spikes, yellow and blue scales as the first of them, and everything changed. She became the leader and the more mature of the group. In private she and Hiccup fantasized about how it would be when the two of them could fly together. Astrid tried to keep Hiccup's hopes up and was his best supporter, ensuring him that his dragon partner would be amazing. With each day Hiccup's powers did not manifest, Astrid's reassurances got fewer and fewer in between. In the end, Astrid was the first to give up on him. The rest of the group was soon to follow. But as the others grew to be his bullies and tormentors, Astrid had never teased him, been cruel or yelled at him. Astrid simply ignored his existence. Her parents had high expectations for their daughter. She was a Horferson. She already had been accepted into multiple summer programs the summer their dragons started to manifest for real, to help her further her powers and talents, and of course she was already accepted into school. Hiccup had only been accepted because of his dad. On Berk, being a Horferson came with certain expectations. Expectations that were already set high by her older siblings, and held even higher by her parents. Astrid was an A-grade student, captain of the track, field and fly team, and was expected to be valedictorian when they graduated in 2 years. She did not have time for Hiccup. And her reputation would have nothing to do with the soulless. That would be too much. So Hiccup tried not to tick her off, by being near her, and Astrid ignored him, and all the things her friends did to him. With a grunt, Astrid thrusted the first aid kit at him and yanked him up. Then she dragged him further away from where they couldn't be seen and sat him down on an upside-down crate. He looked on in confusion as Astrid started finding bandages and cleaning alcohol to help Hiccup's split lip, and shaking hands. She took Hiccup's hand and started patching up his cuts and bruises there first. "Thanks," he said confused, but Astrid shushed him angrily, her scales flared, and eyes turning yellow and into slits. Spikes were peeking out her blonde hair like a crown. Hiccup flinched involuntarily. It took a moment for her, but then she exhaled. The spikes disappeared and the scales died down. When she looked at him again, her eyes were normal blue and there was an air of annoyance over her rather than fury. "I'm not doing it for you," she told him as she cleaned his wounds a bit forcefully. Hiccup tilted his head confused. "Strongfly would not let me leave before I had patched you up." That surprised Hiccup. Astrid rarely talked about her dragon, and rarely let the dragon dictate her way. They were too much in harmony for such disputes. Apparently her maternal instincts are showing, now that you are a sad little terror she can take care of. The air blew out of Hiccup as Astrid put on the last band-aid on his hand. "Come here." Astrid grabbed his face and turned it from side to side as she inspected it. Hiccup winced in her strong grip. "Not much to do about that. Go wash your face before class. You look like a mess." Then she left him with the kit and stormed off. Toothless hummed soothing, while Hiccup felt up his jaw. She didn't have to grab him that hard. After starting school together, Astrid and Hiccup saw very little of each other, but they were both high-grade students and took some of the same high-level classes. Even if Hiccup could not compete with the others on strength and dragon powers, his mind was the sharpest of the bunch, and he almost always scored higher on tests than all of them, taking Astrid's top academic spot. Which pissed her off. Every time Hiccup placed higher than her, or got a better score on a test, Astrid would send him a deadly glare, maybe groan frustrated at him and then stump off to properly take her fury out somewhere else, best at track, field and fly practice. She was the fastest flyer on the team, and held the record for sprint. And the next time Hiccup would see her, her eyes would glaze over him and she would ignore him once again. Hiccup was unsure what was worst, her glare or her indifference. What made matters worse, was still the soul-crushing crush he held for his former best friend. To Hiccup, Astrid was still the most amazing, beautiful badass warrior and girl Hiccup had met. She could kick his ass, and he was kinda digging it. Maybe one of the things that was weird about him. Still his chin and hands burned from where she had touched them, and Hiccup tried to forget the closeness of her face, and her intense glittering eyes. He was only making his situation worse for himself. A soothing rumble in his chest. Toothless apparently also had complicated feelings towards Astrid as well. So why did Astrid's dragon have some sort of feeling of responsibility towards Hiccup's now than he had presented? Notes. Off to a good start, getting to know the gang in this world. And yeah, most of them are jerks at this point, but everyone is trying to figure stuff out. Growing up is hard. Chapter 3, Utter Control. Summary. So with a dragon you get super cool dragon powers, right? Right. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Okay, this time for sure, it would work. Definitely sure. Hiccup concentrated so hard he went cross-eyed in the mirror, but to no avail. Toothless just laughed at his misery and his teeth remained flat and round, with no dragon fangs in sight. He groaned frustrated and rested his head on the sink, while Toothless howled with laughter. I almost had it this time. Hiccup cursed. Toothless just huffed at him, reminding him that he definitely didn't. With another groan, Hiccup ran his hands frustrated over his face as he stared into his bathroom mirror. Why could he not grow dragon fangs? It was one of the first things children learned when practicing their talents. Why was Hiccup failing at it? The gods must hate him. Toothless barked at him, encouraging this time. When Hiccup tried and failed once more, the dragon could not hold the mask and chuckled. Even though it was Saturday, Hiccup had snuck out of bed early and had been practicing his dragon talents for what seemed hours. Still his eyes would not turn completely green, yellow or any other color with slit pupils. He was sure that at one point he made his pupils look a bit square, but no dragon sight, and then he sneezed and his eyes were back to normal. He tried his claws next. But his nails stayed rounded and blunt no matter how hard he tried to concentrate. Toothless found his trials hilarious. Stoic had left earlier to take a fishing trip with Gobber, Stoic's best friend and Hiccup's honorary uncle, leaving Hiccup alone in the house for the rest of the day. Not that he minded. He had not enjoyed being stuck on a boat with nothing to talk about for hours on end, and last year Stoic finally got the hint, and stopped inviting him. Hiccup was not sure how he survived until Saturday after the Tuesday where Snotlout had beat him up behind the cafeteria. The rumor was out and now everywhere he went he was called a terrible terror, even the pack of terrible terrors that went to the school made fun of him, and did not once invite him into their pack. Hiccup was still an outsider. Toothless was insulted by being called a terror, but Hiccup had still no idea what kind of dragon Toothless was, but definitely not a terror. Hiccup had avoided Snotlout like the plague, and ran from secure hiding spot to hiding spot, and hid most of the time in the library, where Snotlout wouldn't have been caught dead. It was a hassle, and Toothless disapproved of his every move, but Hiccup managed to keep his face intact throughout the week, and that was all he hoped for. With a grunt, Hiccup gripped the sink and decided to try one more time. He was turning blue with concentration but still nothing. Toothless laughed. "Just you wait, I'm sure I felt a tingle that time." But there was no tingle, no sensation and his teeth stayed the same. Hiccup sighed and decided he could at least brush them now he had spent over 45 minutes staring at them. After they had all been thoroughly brushed and flossed because why not, Hiccup rinsed and spit down the drain. He caught his own reflection in the mirror. His auburn hair was turning darker, he noticed, but it was still unruly and a bit choppy after all the times he had run his hands frustrated through it this morning. His teeth, now clean, were still a bit crooked even after his braces were removed last year. His lip was mostly healed, so were the cuts on his hands from where he had tried to protect his face while lying down. Having a dragon really helped speed up healing injuries. Nice to know. Also he had had a strange impulse to lick the wounds, only to see them almost heal up on the spot after a couple of licks. Dragon saliva, huh? Who would have known? Hiccup's freckles took over most of his face, and even more of his body. But what he really liked about himself were his eyes. They were a nice warm green and was the only thing he shared with his father. Now that his hair was losing its auburn hue he got from Stoic's fiery red and moved towards his mother's brown roots, and there was no way he would be the same size and build as Stoic, who took after his rumble horn massive build and was shaped like a large three-log. This was the only connection he felt with his father's looks and made him feel like he still was his son. A bit annoyed he shook out his toothbrush and put it back in its cup. He looked back at his own reflection and smiled, showing off his teeth. Toothless smiled with him. He could tell. A joyous warm feeling spread over him and his jaw tingled. And then his teeth disappeared. Hiccup screamed and fell back away from the mirror, as he felt his now toothless gums. After some struggling he managed to get back up to inspect himself in the mirror with panic. Pulling at his mouth to look further inside. Then suddenly his teeth were back. Hiccup felt them relieved with his tongue and almost collapsed on top of the sink. "Oh, thank the gods!" Toothless hummed. Hiccup looked back up at his reflection, and could feel Toothless' taunting eyebrow. A challenge. Huh. Hiccup stood up and focused on his reflection. Instead of trying to make his teeth grow longer, he tried to make them smaller. Remembering the warm tingling sensation and the feeling of Toothless in his mind. He gaped as the teeth retracted into his gums. He let out a triumphant yelp, only then remembering he had to get them back. It took a couple of tries, but then his teeth extended into his mouth once more. Hiccup was both mortified and impressed. Retractable teeth. Huh. That's why your name is Toothless. You're toothless. Your teeth are retractable. Hiccup clapped his own cheeks and spun around with glee, Toothless smiling, showing off his empty mouth, only for Hiccup to freeze. "My teeth are retractable." He groaned again. Did he get to have cool fangs? Of course not. He got empty ridiculous gums instead. Of course, just his luck. Toothless raised a challenging taunting eyebrow at him, frowning at his displeasure. Hiccup chuckled at his dragon's pride. "It's not a bad thing," he reassured his reflection and Toothless. "Just not what I expected." He grinned, participating in Toothless' mirth as they left the bathroom, grateful that he managed to obtain some control at least. Not a lot, but it was a start. Maybe his powers were not that obvious like other dragons. Maybe Toothless was special. He had to figure out what Toothless could do. A victorious roar echoed in his mind. Apparently Toothless approved. The following Monday he went to the library in school and pulled out every book he could find about dragon spices and their talents. When he dumped his stack of books in front of the librarian to check out, the lady looked over the brim of her glasses with dragon eye precision and said, "You know we have the internet now, right?" "I know." Hiccup nodded. The lady studied him for a moment before checking his books out. Hiccup had looked at the internet all Saturday and Sunday. Every list of dragons he could find, but most of the lists focused on the more common species, and only a few lines of descriptions on rare ones. Nothing useful. So Hiccup decided he wanted to try other methods. He deposited one half of his books in his locker, and the rest in his bag. He had to flatten himself against the metal as a group of overgeared teenagers ran past him, yelling about shifter practice. Hiccup thunked his head against his locker. Shifter training. Dang it. That was today. He had been so caught up in Toothless that he forgot. Cursing his own forgetfulness, he hiked up his backpack and ran to the gymnasium where training was held. Their instructor Mildew walked the line up and down like a military sergeant, inspecting the students who had signed up for shifter training. Hiccup had always been surprised that it was Mildew who was in charge of shifter training. He hated dragons, and hated the young boisterous display of their talent. Excessive and needless. Control, utter and foremost control was needed. That was the mantra he drilled into his students for them to achieve the highest form for harmony with their dragons. To control your dragon, command it to give you its form and keep the control, or else the dragon would break free and you would be gone. Hiccup was not sure what kind of dragon Mildew actually had. He never displayed any dragon traits, and appeared totally human. Only a snarl or a hiss at some incompetent student revealed that there actually lived a dragon inside the old grumpy man. Hiccup peeked out from his spot down the line to look at Mildew, while he lectured a student about prober control. Mildew could feel he was being watched, his thin grey hair sticking out like antennas and his large frizzy moustache twitching, as he flinched towards Hiccup, and Hiccup straightened back in line with a start, but too late. He had been spotted. Mildew stalked down the line to stop in front of him with arms crossed. "So, Mr. Haddock has decided to grace us with his presence this time." Hiccup could hear the condescending snickers from Snotlout and the twins in the front of the line. Stoic had signed Hiccup up for shifter training, but since Hiccup had no dragon, he just sat by the sidelines in the gym, watching the other students try to shapeshift into full-blown dragons. "Yes sir," Hiccup answered, looking Mildew straight in the eyes, definitely not flinching at the man's stinky breath. Mildew snorted unimpressed and looked down at his clipboard, drawing out time. Hiccup had to stop himself from rolling his eyes, as Mildew tsked and ran his finger down the list of names, and their registered dragons, which he already had memorized, as he missed Hiccup's name on purpose multiple times. "Mr. Haddock. Mr. Haddock, Mr. Haddock, Mr. Haddock, here you are." He nodded again and again as he studied his papers. "Terrible terror." He sighed overdramatic at Hiccup. "Not very impressive, but at this point you should just be glad that you got something." More snickers through the line, and Hiccup clenched his fist, as Toothless hissed. "That being said," Mildew said with sudden seriousness, making the whole line straighten with attention and fear, as he poked the end of the clipboard into Hiccup's chest. "Terrible terrors are not the strongest shifters. Your body is gonna be under tremendous stress trying to shift into a skin that's small, even if you are small to begin with and it is your true form. Do not underestimate the energy, harmony and pain this will take. Are you still willing to continue? There was a strange clarity to Mildew's eyes. Hiccup nodded solemnly. Splendid. A wicked grin spread across Mildew's face like a cat that caught the mouse. Let's begin. He whacked Hiccup on top of the head with his clipboard and walked back to the front of the line. Hiccup's neighbors chuckled as Hiccup rubbed the now aching spot on his head. Toothless growled. Now let's focus. On uttermost control. Mildew yelled as he walked down the line. He started yelling instructions, and the students started to close their eyes in concentration, clenching their fist, gritting their teeth, flapping their arms like wings, and some even wiggling their butts trying to force their dragon's self to the surface. Hiccup looked uncomfortable down the line at all the blue faces, and concentrated minds. The only one that stood still was Astrid. She stood in front of the line with her eyes closed and a calm, collected relaxed stance. After 10 minutes of trying, Astrid's neighbors, including Snotlout, screamed in surprise and ducked out of the way as Astrid grew and grew. The other students stopped and gawked as Astrid's face contracted, and her body withered. Her legs grew and from her knee down expanded into 2 large blue scale-covered feet, with long sharp claws at the end, and small spikes at the hind legs. Her arms stretched and stretched until they unfolded as 2 large wings covered in yellow, blue, and brown spots, her thumbs extending and solidifying into hooks. With a thump, a massive tail landed on the floor behind her, covered in blue and yellow spikes, that went all the way up to her backside. Her face changed color, and her nose elongated. Spikes and scales sprouted across her body, and most of her face. A crown of spikes grew on top of her head, large and intimidating. The student awed around her. But Astrid shook it off and took a step forward in her half-transformed deadly nada state. Her face and most of her body was still very much human, but had grown to support the dragon-sized appendixes. Her face was still Astrid. Blue scales dusted her cheeks, and red ones framed her eyes, making it look like every elaborate eye makeup. Fangs protruded from her mouth, and her nose ended in a large yellow spike. She shook herself like a large bird and turned around. The students stared in more awe. This was the most complete transformation any of them had seen so close. None of them had even come near. Very impressive. Excellent job, Miss Horferson. Mildew nodded. As expected of a Horferson. Was Hiccup the only one that noticed Astrid flinching a bit at that last comment, but it was only for a second before Astrid's confident grin was back. Now, there you see it. Uttermost control. Rest of you back at it, I have better things to do than babysit a bunch of nitwits like you. The students threw themselves into it once more with even more eagerness to try and replicate Astrid's success. The line split into groups and packs, even if Mildew yelled to get back in line. In the end he just sighed, rolled his eyes and went to get coffee, ensuring even more chaos in his absence. Astrid stood with Snotlout, Fishlegs and the twins smiling as they congratulated and complimented her accomplishment. She showed off her wings and claws, and made her tail swish from side to side, even making it puff up with spikes ready to fire at will. The twins were astonished at the lethalness and power, while Snot looked like he was melting. Hiccup retreated to a corner and watched them every now and then with jealousy. When Mildew returned, the hour was almost up and most of the students sprouted varying degrees of scales, fangs and claws. No major transformation like Astrid. One had managed to start growing a trail, but now had problems making it grow back. A Fishlegs had mangled to transform his ears, and the small fruncle ears that looked like small wings now fluttered every time he moved. Snotlout was the closest. All his visible skin was covered in scales, black, red and yellow, and 4 horns had knocked his black beanie off, and his eyes had turned yellow and large fangs grew from his mouth. Even his hands had grown large hook-like claws. He got a satisfied nod from Mildew and was over the moon. Mildew yelled at them to line up so he could inspect their progress. Hiccup waited at the end of the line. Mildew went down the line and commented each attempt, nodded at the more prominent transformations, mumbling things like, good, good, do better, good, laughable, pathetic, good, better, try harder next time, until he ended at Hiccup and took in Hiccup's unchanged very human appearance. Disappointing, Mr. Haddock, but not surprising. Then he went off, dismissing the kids. The kid's transformations and scales all melted away, except the kid with the half-tail who still walked out of the gym, scaly tail hanging out of their pants. Everyone flocked to Astrid as they tried to ask for tips and bask in her presence. Hiccup used the confusion to slip out unnoticed to hide away in a bathroom. Nothing had happened. He had tried and nothing had happened. Toothless had been silent the entire hour. Because he wasn't sure about what Toothless was, he was not sure what to focus on. The whole control thing Mildew was spewing on and on about did not work for him, so he gave up. Control, force, yell, kick and scream. Not really for him. And not for Toothless either. Instead he had practiced retracting his teeth, and could now do it on command. Not that anybody would know. It was not exactly a sort of ability to be proud of, and Hiccup would not be chastised for his newfound talent, and refused to show Mildew. Toothless approved of this, and Hiccup could feel the dragon's pride in his growing control. Notes. I wanna emphasize that shifting is a psychical process, that takes a lot of effort, even it part of life. No magical Sailor Moon ribbons. It is muscle, bone and skin and not all pretty. The cases I am describing is pretty mild, but I like to imagine being stuck between human and dragon is not always as artistic pleasing, and you are unlucky in this sort of half state. Chapter 4, What is a Dragon? Summary. Stoic finds out about Hiccup's dragon. It goes as well as can be expected. Chapter text. As soon as he had the chance, Hiccup grabbed his backpack full of books and rushed home. The driveway was empty, meaning Stoic was off on a shift. Hiccup unloaded all the books on the kitchen table and continued to flip through them, reading bits and headlines, trying to get a hint of something interesting or even useful. He went through an encyclopedia of dragon spices filled with drawn depictions of dragons, made properly a couple of 100 years ago. The drawings were crude, hard to decipher and made in a typical Nordic style, making them more art than actual factual depictions. He almost gave up, when his eyes landed on one of the smallest books. It was called The Dragon Manual, by H.H.H. A bit confused at seeing his own initials, Hiccup picked up the book. It was old and tattered and some of the front had faded. Hiccup guessed it had probably been used to even out a library table for a couple of decades, before finding its way back to the shelves, but what he found inside was a gold mine. Detailed, intriguing descriptions of dragons and their traits, characteristics and talents. Each entry had a list of carefully calculated stats and a drawing of said dragon. Hiccup could not believe it. He flipped through the thin book, and saw dragons he had never heard of before. Too rare and old to be found in modern Berk. There was even a record of known dragon partners and a possibility of them being reincarnated. Too soon Hiccup reached the end only to find a footnote. Part 1 out of 15. There were 15 more books like this. It even recommended reading the original Book of Dragons, translated from Old Norse, originally written back in the Viking Age. This was unbelievable. Toothless whirled his head in interest, feeling Hiccup's excitement, but was not quite sure what the fuss was about. Hiccup was determined to go back to the library and find the rest of the books. He looked through the drawings again, trying to find anything that reminded him of what he believed Toothless looked like in his mind. They learned about the most common dragon species and other dragon spirits in school and growing up. Once in a while a yak, or a sheep spirit would appear among all the different dragons, but the last one of those had been over 80 years ago. Old Miller was now in a retirement home barring at the nurses, still probably gonna live another 80 years. When more rare dragon species appeared when the children presented, they were pulled aside and educated about said spices. If the spices of dragon were indeterminable, they were put through a series of tests to help determine the dragon spices. Since Hiccup presented so late, he hadn't told anybody. Nobody had pulled him aside and started poking needles at him. Hiccup was not gonna ruin his good needle-less streak now, and would rather determine himself. When Hiccup pictured Toothless, he seemed larger than life, sleek and smooth. Large wings, font legs, and a long tail. There was something different about the tail, but he could not put his finger on it. That narrowed Hiccup's guess about his species in, a little. The black though, threw him off. He never read about a completely black dragon. It was not even mentioned in the guide he just discovered. Since Toothless' speech was limited, he could not outright tell Hiccup his specific species name. They communicated in meanings, moods and feelings. A complicated word like the scientific human name of a dragon species, was more than Hiccup's charade skills could muster. So the closest they could come was Toothless shaking his head as Hiccup ran his finger down the index of dragons. Toothless was able to name some of the other spices, just not in so many words. Rock-eater, Gronkle, Two-face Gasmouth Zipleback, Ground Shaker Whispering Death, Lighting Maker Skrill, Firemoran Monstrous Nightmare. Sometimes Toothless also came with names for dragons Hiccup could not identify. Ice Breather, Red Death, Critter Food Stealer, Nowhere, Bumperling Basher. Hiccup had no idea what those titles covered. When Toothless tried to describe himself he just said, Leader, Protector, Fast, Energy Breather, Invisible, Dark, Brother. That last word was the most important. The dragon kept reminding Hiccup that was who he was. He was Hiccup's brother. His other half. His soulmate. An overwhelming warmth always flooded Hiccup's senses with the statement. The overwhelming trust and love that the dragon felt for him. Even though he only had known the dragon for a short time, Hiccup was sure he already loved the dragon. No questions asked. No one had ever told him that he would love his other half. They were just a part of one of the many things nobody talked about. When talking about dragons, nobody ever talked about this. Hiccup was coming to think that there was more to this bond than what people were letting on. That maybe there was more to discover than what his teachers and mildew tried to teach him. Hiccup was determined to find his own way. To fully reach his potential with Toothless as his partner. To discover this whole new part of himself, to accept it as well. He loved Toothless, loved his dragon half, but loving the dragon and loving the dragon as part of himself would take time. He was not used to being loved so openly. To have someone thinking of him all the time, care for him all the time. He was not used to thinking much of himself. To feel the respect, appreciation and love for himself was shaking him to the core. He never thought we would be worth anything. That came with being soulless for so long, he thought. An ugly thought planted itself in his heart and took root. Why? An interested hum sounded from his dragon. Why did it take so long? Why did I just present now? Why weren't you there? Why now? Was I not good enough? Was it a test? There was a long pause of silence, before the rumbling soothing purr washed over him. Then he was met with waves of feelings. Sadness, uncertainty, affection, pride, sadness. Sadness over being late, pride over Hiccup as his partner and heartbreak. So much heartbreak over being late, leaving Hiccup alone without him. But mostly there was love. Unmistakable, unconditional love and reassurance. It was more than Hiccup had hoped for, but not quite an answer. Still, Hiccup's eyes felt itchy, as tears tried to make their way out. He shook his head. Toothless purrs and soft barks were like a comforting blanket. It was not him. It was just how it was. A little unlucky, but the promise that it was going to get better. That Hiccup wasn't alone now, that Toothless would protect him. Son. Hiccup looked up, surprised to see his father in the doorway. He was not supposed to be home. Oh. Hi Dad. He chuckled, his voice raspy. Watcha doing? His father looked around the kitchen, at all the books cluttering the table, between Hiccup's notebooks and a knocked-over pencil case. Hiccup rubbed his eyes forcefully, trying to hide the not yet spilled tears from Stoic, as well as gathering the book, so he couldn't catch a glimpse of the titles. He was not sure Stoic would understand what he was going through. Just some studying. Don't worry Dad, I got it. What are you doing home? With a careful smile, Hiccup discreetly put his elbow on the book stack, concealing the last bit of evidence. Oh, Stoic cleared his throat, looking around the kitchen once more. I was looking for this. He grabbed his travel mug he used for coffee from the counter, holding it up like a trophy. Can't go on patrol without it. He chuckled, making his big bushy mustache vibrate over his even larger full beard. Oh yeah. Hiccup nodded awkwardly. The sounds of his fingers tapping the table was impossible high, in the uncomfortable awkward silence in the kitchen asterisk. So, Stoic tried, eyes looking around for help. So, Hiccup echoed his father, his tapping becoming more frantic. His hands felt clammy and sweaty. His father cleared his throat once more, looking like he was gathering his bearings, before he shrugged and ran a hand over his beard, stroking it thoughtfully. I heard, some say. I mean. Hiccup raised an eyebrow. Stoic was mumbling, looking for the right words, looking around the room to find help. In school, that you. I mean, a terrible knot tightened in Hiccup's gut, as his dad fumbled with his words. Mildew registered you as a terrible terror, and then wrote me a email, needing to confirm. The awkward silence and unsaid words stretched between them, only interrupted in Hiccup's mind, where Toothless snorted over being called a terror. But Stoic couldn't hear that, so the kitchen was silent. Painfully silent. After a moment, Hiccup bit his lip and said, "And if I were?" It was like a light that lit up behind his father's eyes. He sprang further into the room and pulled out a chair, inching closer to Hiccup to hear more. The sheer joy clear on his face, and an excited tremor running through this large barrel body, like a kid getting handed a giant gift. Hiccup moved a bit back in his seat, unsure about this new excited version of his normally very serious father. Dad, Yes, please tell me more, his father nodded, eagerly, hands grabbing his knees, one leg tapping like a nervous tick, trying to keep all the energy contained. His father's intense stare was making him nervous. It had been some time since they had been this close to each other. His father's smile relished all the opportunities that suddenly had unraveled, and the hope shone from his eyes. And Hiccup knew that he would have to break it. Again. Toothless was still his, and there was no guarantee that Toothless could live up to all the hopes and dreams Stoic had set up and expected. Expected of Hiccup. Better to soften the blow now, than build up to a huge disappointment later. Dad, with a frown, Hiccup sighed resigned, but with encouragement from Toothless he spoke. I haven't really presented. Stoic blinked. He blinked one more, the words not really connecting in his mind. He shook his head to shake off the haze, and tried to reason with his son. Shaking his big meaty hand almost in Hiccup's face. A gesture Hiccup recognized in his own mannerism. But you have a dragon, it's only a matter of, but Hiccup held up both of his hands to stop Stoic. Dad, I don't have any talents. The words had come out fast, harsh and brash in no way the way Hiccup wanted it to sound. That stopped Stoic. He looked confused at his son. His smile turned into a frown, and his eyebrows sinking into their usual place in a firm line. Cringing under his father's glare, Hiccup wrung his hands. I can't grow fangs. I can't sprout claws. That's like step one. And I can't do it. I can hear him, I can feel him, but, Hiccup kept his eyes focused on the table, trying not to break under his father's stare. He knew he was a failure, he knew he was a disappointment, but it was still hard to say the words out loud. I can't. That's step one. And I can't do it. Stoic shook his head, dismissing Hiccup's words. But you will. You will soon. Before long you will. Guilt builded up in Hiccup's chest, but so did defiance. But what if it doesn't, Dad? What if it never happens? Stoic blinked at the sharpness at Hiccup's words. Hiccup leaned forward, feeling the courage from his dragon emanating from his core. Just because I now have a dragon, don't it make me less soulless than before? I'm still just me. He looked away, not daring to look at the disappointment that would be prominent in his father's eyes. A firm hand landed on his shoulder. You have to try. Stoic said. His voice rumbling with more than just his usual baritone. His dragon's rumble peeking forth, reassuring Hiccup in a way only he could. You won't know, before you try. So try. There was a dismissive tone with the advice. Hiccup knew his father tried, but he still felt like he was not heard. His father left the kitchen table, shaking his massive body and grabbing his travel mug, usual stern expression back on. I'll be late. You're going over to Gobber? He asked, already shrugging on his boots. As usual. Hiccup rolled his eyes. Hiccup spent a lot of his free time helping out Gobber in the garage. In exchange Gobber would let him fiddle with his own projects, when clients and customers have left. When Stoic was working evenings and nights, Hiccup would stay at Gobber's place for dinner. Hiccup would eat, do homework, and Gobber would leave him mostly alone. Good. Stoic huffed with a grunt and then he was out the door. Talk to you later, son. Hiccup shook with the sound, as the front door closed behind his father. Disgruntled, Hiccup buried his head in his arms. Toothless cooed at him, to look up. To reassure. To help. Hiccup gave his own reassuring tug at their bond, hugging himself as it was the closest thing he came to hug Toothless. The pride rolled over him. Toothless was proud of his decision. Was okay with keeping him secret. Hiccup could almost feel like he was being nuzzled by the big dragon. When Hiccup was little, his dad's dragon would be more expressive. His father would hum him to sleep in his arms, and Skull Crusher would purr and rumble in his father's chest, soothing little Hiccup further. As a baby, Stoic would play peekaboo, changing his own face to Skull Crusher's in between each peek, only to delight the giggling baby Hiccup. They even went flying once in a while. Skull Crusher's body was close to the ground, and Hiccup was still too little to sit on his back without falling off, so his dad had bundled up Hiccup and on his stomach as he shifted, letting Skull Crusher fly around with the laughing child strapped him to his stomach. The dragon laughed along with Hiccup, his roar rumbling in his chest making Hiccup yell with glee as they soared over the island. Unfortunately, Valka found out and Hiccup was never allowed to fly again. After that, Stoic was more careful with him and around his dragon. It saddened Hiccup a little, but he knew the dragon loved him as much as his father did. It was clear the time Stoic had let his dragon out, and it had looked down along his large horn, poking him gently so he fell over, chuckling and helping him up after, making Hiccup coo and grin. Stoic had once told Hiccup as they sat reading on the couch, that it was more about trust than who was in control. Stoic trusted Skull Crusher not to hurt Hiccup, to fly them to safety, to change back to human form when needed. Weird how they could talk for hours and hours about dragons when Hiccup was little, and now, Stoic and Hiccup could barely hold one conversation together. Hiccup sighed again. Skull Crusher had introduced Hiccup to flying, and now Hiccup missed it. He had for a long time come to terms that he was never gonna fly again. Being soulless meant no dragon, and no wings. He missed to soar between the clouds, to feel the wind on his face and in his fur, to fall free from everything, just letting everything disappear. Just to be up there, close to the sun, closer to something bigger himself. A low rumble vibrated through him, as memories that he was not quite sure was truly his own flashed before him. The wind on his wings, the smell of the thin crisp air, as sunlight had just hit it, the air when you dive through the clouds. The feeling of being completely weightless before falling and catching yourself at the last moment. Hiccup could almost smell it himself. Toothless missed it too, he realized. Hiccup's shoulders and tailbone itched. One more thing to add to the list. Okay, no more of this. Hiccup pushed himself away from the table. He had work to do. Toothless roared agreeingly. They were gonna be the best dragon partner and flyers Burke had seen in a long time. Chapter 5, To the Library. Summary. When the internet fail ya, you go to the library. When that fail ya, ask a friend, I guess. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The next day Hiccup stood again in front of the librarian holding up the thin dragon guidebook. She looked slightly amused at him. The boisterous teenage dragons at Burke did not come up to her desk to ask for books. Where can I find the rest? He waved the thin book in her face. The librarian blinked at him, unused to actually being asked to do work. With an annoyed sigh, she pushed her chair back and they walked down aisles and aisles of books. They spent a good 15 minutes trying to locate the other books, only to find 3 others. The librarian shook her head, not understanding why they were not on their spot, when the system said it should be. The eyes were turning more yellow than normal, her dragon being agitated in the same way as she. After a moment she huffed, defeated. Sorry kid. Try the public library. Hiccup still thanked her, and left with the little gold mine of knowledge in his hand. He found an empty corner in a classroom and started to roam through the books. His phone buzzed and he looked over it. Email from Mom. He opened it and a picture of a great landscape from on top of a mountain loaded. Below it said, "Nature is truly beautiful. Wish you were here to see it with me. Say hi to your dad for me. Love, Mom. Hiccup smiled solemnly and saved the picture to a folder on his phone, filled with his mother's pictures. They were beautiful things, long stretches of land of dirt, deserts, oceans, jungles and mountains. Sights she wished her family could see. It had been 2 years since she had last been home. And that was only to see Hiccup. She had brought him to the fair, brought him candy floss, and talked about her journeys. One or twice she asked how Hiccup was doing, if he was excited about starting in the new school. If he had felt any dragon presence yet. He was pretty sure Valka and Stoic had not as much as seen each other during the visit. The older Hiccup got, the more their dragons seemed to hate each other. Hiccup loved his mom, but he was pretty sure the woman had no idea what kind of person he was, or how to interact with her own son. Maybe it hurt too much to get to know him and then leave him. Shrugging, Hiccup put his phone away and pulled over the next issue in the Dragon Guide series. Yesterday he spent the night at Gobbar's helping him cleaning up the garage, eating only half-bad soup afterwards, reading in his books, while Gobber watched the Dragon Ball game on the telly. The books were interesting, revealing details of dragons he never heard of, and talents he never heard of. But never one that fitted Toothless. He spent the rest of the hour looking over these books as well, with the same result. As the bell rang, he left for his last class disappointed but determined to know more. With a start, he jumped out of the way of Astrid, who was entering the room. He panted and turned around to run the other way, while he could feel her glaring eyes bore into his neck. Even the safety of the classroom could not dwell on the feeling of her anger shearing through his skull. He blushed furiously. She had braided her hair to the other side today. She looked nice. He wished he told her, so maybe she wouldn't glare at him next time they met in the halls. He kept up his pace as he heard Astrid's annoyed huff as she went into his abandoned classroom. Stange. Hiccup did not recollect Astrid taking math /cal this semester. At lunch he ducked behind a door so he avoided being seen by Snotlout and his friends, but he could have sworn Snotlout slightly tensed as he passed Hiccup's hiding place. Hiccup was clearly overexcited to start imagining something like that. Toothless snorted bored. When the group was out of sight he left, only to bump into Astrid again, making her drop her phone and a couple of books she was carrying. Cursing his own rotten luck, he scrambled to gather them up and hand them over to her, apologizing the whole time. He could barely look at her as she accepted her books. He felt her eyes sizing him up, and Hiccup wished one of Toothless' talents had been turning invisible. Astrid groaned, then thrusted one of the books into his chest, knocking the wind out of him. You left this in the classroom, you dork. At least clean up after yourself. That is school property, you know. He looked down at a copy of the Dragon Guide which he apparently had left behind without noticing. He looked up into blue eyes studying him. Astrid stood expectancy, hands on her hip and a frown. Her braid rested on her right shoulder, not a single hair out of place. What? You have something to say? Astrid challenged defensively. Hiccup winced involuntarily. I didn't think so. Astrid nodded and passed him. With his breath uneven and his heart stuck in his throat, Hiccup turned after her and half shouted after her so all the hallway could hear. Your hair looks nice today. Astrid stopped and turned to stare at him. Eyes wide, mouth open and looking absolutely horrified. The tiniest hint of blue scales had spurted under her chin, not even noticeable. Hiccup eyes winded. Oh gods, what has he done? He could already feel scales growing on his own chin, and hands. Toothless roared with laughter. Without waiting for a response Hiccup fled the hall, not wanting it to turn into a crime scene. All the way the horrified expression on Astrid's face haunted him. But if he thought about it hard enough, he was sure there had been the smallest hint of pink on the tips of her ears. He groaned, dragging a hand down his face. Stupid mouth. Why did I say that? Hiccup cursed as he tried to loosen the screw on his motorbike. That was on an old vintage thing, he had bought for practically nothing, as it was more garbage than machine and was supported to be thrown out years ago. Hiccup spent all his work, and money earned from working at Gobbus, buying and replacing the parts one by one, fine-tuning, upgrading and trying to make it work. If he couldn't fly, then this would be the next best thing. When he was old enough, he would drive this instead. He had just gotten a new extortion pipe, and was now fighting with an old one. Even if he now had a dragon, he still wanted to ride this thing one day. Too much work, money, blood, sweat, tears and soul had already gone into the thing, and Hiccup was not giving up on it. He was stubborn like that. Stupid brain. Astrid's wide-blown eyes had burned into Hiccup's eyelid. Toothless had been chuckling and laughing ever since, as an annoying constant rumbling in the back of his mind. Stupid dragon. Hiccup gave the wrench an extra pull. It didn't budge. Oh, she must think I'm crazy, he groaned with the effort as he put his whole body weight onto the wrench. It slipped from the blot, and Hiccup had to catch himself, so he didn't face-plant into the bike. Toothless' amusement grew louder. Useless reptile. Didn't the dragon grant extra strength? But no. Toothless had yawned at him. Yawned, and Hiccup was left to fight with the tools himself. Stupid wrench. He held up the tool and growled at it like it had offended him. Stupid screw. He growled at the bolt next. Whatcha doing? Gobber's mellow accent cut through Hiccup's concentration and spooked him, jumping up to his feet. Ah! Hiccup cursed as he hit his head on the one of the handlebars, and he half rose to meet Gobber's unimpressed raised eyebrow. With a growl Hiccup cursed again and rubbed the sore spot. He threw the wrench back into the old toolbox, where it landed with a hard clatter. He grabbed his ears at the ringing, as Toothless whined at the sound. Great, dragon ears, right. He got to be better at remembering stuff like that, or wear soundproof earmuffs wherever he went. How's it coming along? Gobber kneeled down next to Hiccup on his one good leg to inspect Hiccup's handiwork on the bike. He nodded approvingly here and there. The other leg was wrapped in his cam boot. After Gobber had dropped some equipment over his right foot in his younger days, the bones in the foot had shattered, and never healed up right. With the strength of his dragon, he was able to walk mostly without pain, but he kept his boot to make the day-to-day easier. His left hand had also been shattered, but in a different accident, but the doctors were unable to save it. Now he wore a hand prosthesis instead. But more often than not, Gobber had strapped a tool, a toothbrush, a spatula or something else in the socket that should have held the immobile plastic hand. Hiccup kinda admired the ingenuity. So. Hiccup snorted, still rubbing his sore scalp. Gobber got up and went around, his foot dragging as he went. Have you thought of a name yet? He asked as he looked over the bike. Hiccup rolled his eyes. Not yet. Nothing has really spoken to me. Hiccup leaned back on his hands as he looked the half-done bike up and down. Ah, don't worry lad. It will come to ya, all in good time. Gobber rose and ruffed Hiccup's hair on the way. Now get yourself cleaned up, and I will find us some grub, so I can tell your father, I at least tried to feed ya. He folded his hands behind his back and mumbled under his breath. Not that gotta help you grow much bigger anyway. I heard that. Hiccup yelled at him. I know. Gobber yelled back, chuckling as he limped into the house. Hiccup shook his head, but chuckled at the odd man. Hiccup grabbed a rag and started to dry off oil and dirt on his hands. Gobber had taught everything Hiccup knew about machines, engines and tools, and Hiccup was grateful for that. Giving him something to do that didn't make him feel useless. And he generally enjoyed talking to the old fart. So yeah, Gobber was brash, loud and abrasive with no sense of personal boundaries, but he was good enough deep down. Hiccup dealt with Gobber's complaining and Gobber dealt with Hiccup's sarcasm and dry wit, and even listened to him ramble about design ideas and of course the bike. It worked for them. Hiccup parked himself at the table with all his books, and opened his laptop to take notes at his finding. Gobber placed a steaming bowl of microwaved mac and cheese and hobbled over to his chair in front of the TV with his own bowl. For a long time, the sound of the TV and the cutlery was the only sound. Then Gobber grumbled from his place at the TV. What's all that work for? He scratched his bushy blonde mustache, eyes never leaving the screen. Hiccup bit his lip trying to think of an excuse. Gobber had not brought up anything about Hiccup's rumored terror, and Hiccup was not sure what to tell him. Oh, just some stupid assignment, he brushed him off, hoping he sounded genuine. They're really working ya to your tailbone, huh? Another grunt, and Hiccup could hear Gobber scratching something. Yeah. There was another moment of silence. Gobber asked again. What is it about? Hiccup tried not to groan outright, but figured there was no way around not giving the man something. He would just keep prying, until he got what he wanted. So why not a half-truth? Gobber may even prove himself useful and help Hiccup get to the right path. We have to identify a rare dragon species using only a handful of trays. He scratched his pen on a notepad next to the laptop. Gobber smacked his lips. Well, what ya got? Hiccup looked down on his notes. Big, black scales, wings separate from legs, and retractable teeth. A rumble ran through him and fast. Toothless purred content with the addition. Hiccup smiled at the dragon antics. In the living room, Gobber scratched his chin, and shouted back into the kitchen, eyes still plastered to the screen. Hey ya, if I ain't no better, that kinda sound like a fury. Hiccup dropped his book. A what? He looked towards Gobber with a gabbing mouth. Toothless was eerily silent inside his mind. Gobber kept scratching his chin as he grumbled. But that's ain't be true. No one ave seen a furry in over a century. Hiccup rose from his seat to better glance over to the man in the other room. Say it again, Gobber. A what? Gobber sighed, his head popping forth from the side of his chair, so Hiccup could see him. He slowed down his speech, to better pronounce every word, so the meaning didn't get lost in his accent. Night Fury. God's bless your child, don't they teach you anything in school? He leaned back in his chair with a huff. Hiccup felt his excitement grow. I never heard of it. Where have you heard about it? With another grunt, Gobber rose from his chair and limped around the room, and back into the kitchen where Hiccup was seated. Well, from me, trusty book of dragons, of course. A well-loved dusty book hit the table in front of Hiccup. Frantically, Hiccup reached for it with a heave, and opened the large old book, flipping through pages until he found what he looked for. Gobber snorted, amused at him. Night Fury. Speed, unknown. Size, unknown. The unholy offspring of lightning and death itself. Never engage this dragon. Your only chance, hide and pray it does not find you. Hiccup read out loud from the book. That's it. He yelled indignantly, trying not to pull his hair out, almost missing the triumphant bark from Toothless. No depiction, no drawing, no facts, no description of talents. No nothing. To his surprise, Gobber roared with laughter. His big belly jumped up and down. Probably a side effect of having a hobblegump for a dragon. Even though a not fully fledged shifter, Gobber could still summon the great mallet tail to use on bigger projects. He had been able to shift in his younger days, but not a full shift anymore. Oh, you should have seen yourself. Of course not in that one. He took the book from Hiccup and held up another book, very similar in build and size to its predecessor. This is me personal copy of the Book of Dragons. Handed down to me through me granddad, and his granddad before him. Said to have been written by one of the old Vikings chiefs. One of the first great shifters. Hiccup reached for it gingerly, and opened the book with shaking hands. His breath hitched as his eyes landed on the right page. Toothless, he whispered, because that was who was staring back at him with ink-drawn eyes. Depiction upon depiction of a large, slick black dragon with wide wings, long tail with tail fins at the end and near the base of the tail. Rounded ear flaps, and smaller noobs going down the chin. A wide toothless mouth, and intelligent eyes. Big flat feet with long nails and tassels behind the hind legs. A Night Fury. Strike class dragon. Known for their speed and for being almost invisible against the night sky. Able to dive bomb from great height, using plasma blast as their primary weapon, but some have recorded one being able to control lightning. Not to mistake for the Light Fury, who is a similar build and strut, but completely white. The two species have though time been known to mingle and mate, when no other available partner of their own species was available. Hiccup ran his finger across the page as he read, one rarest and most intelligent of the dragon species, the Night Fury is distinguished by its dark color and piercing yellow eyes. Hiccup suddenly felt very small. A Night Fury. How in the world had he been able to attract a Night Fury? Toothless chuckled in his mind, our mows over Hiccup's despair. Now that he had seen the depiction of the dragon, he was better able to imagine Toothless in his mind. The long body, with large wings, wrapped protectively around him. He could picture the small changes in the dragon's face when his mood changed. A wave of reassurance and confidence ran through his body, affection at its center. The dragon's smirk wandered onto his own face. A night fury. He had wings. He would be able to fly. Notes. I live for teenage angst and crushes. At that age sometimes the brains simply do not connect at the right time. Gobber lives for Hiccup's teenage misery. Keeps him young. Deep down he loves the boy like his own, and that give teasing rights. Also he does not take crap for nothing. Lifetime dealing with bad customers to give a shit. This man has seen things. Chapter 6, Focus. Summary. Dragon and teenage hormones, who comes out on top? Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Oh come on Toothless, I saw the drawing. Wings and tail, we should be able to fly. The dragon huffed and remained silent in Hiccup's mind once more. They were out in the forest at the outskirts of the town. It seemed like when the first Viking settlers had first found the island, they chose whatever side of the island they hit first to settle on. That meant that most of the original village was scattered over the cliff side of the island, which of course was the most dangerous and steep part of the whole island, instead of moving more inward to the more plain livable part of the island. Still, with more people and more needs for space, the village had become a town that moved more inland to make room for a football stadium, fast food chains, shopping malls, museums, galleries, schools, houses, police station, med clinic, and such of what makes up for a modern society. That included the boba tea shop. Now the old village had mostly become a harbor and storage to keep up with all the import and export going in and out of the island by ship. Still using the steep cliffside, but connected by roads and roads of heavily secured walkways mounted into the stone. The area was still littered with relics of what had once been. Large stone statues of old dead Vikings heroes long gone. A large indent in a rock, where it had been speculated to house some kind of fighting ring, now used to store smaller boats. A gigantic horn larger than a house snaked around a rock, still functioning, now fenced and preserved by the local museum, but a frequently visited tourist spot. The large Great Hall, carved into the side of the mountain, had been refurbished to a Viking museum about Berk's proud heritage. When the structure was first rediscovered, the local scientists recovered a large amount of ancient artifacts that had been preserved from weather and time, including a rare collection of weapons, banners, shields and strange saddles. The last addition was still a mystery to many scientists and archaeologists. Even though the town of Berk had grown and grown, the forest was still mostly untouched. Call it superstition, but nobody would start developing real estate there, and it became a safe haven to Hiccup as a young boy. Hiccup had played and explored there, with his old friends here when they were children. Played pirates and Vikings and of course dragons. Chasing each other pretending to breathe fire. As they got older they visited less and less, and until it was just him and Astrid. In the end, it had also been the place where Astrid had told him they couldn't be friends anymore. The Horfusons had noticed that Hiccup was the only one in the friends group that had not started showing the wanted dragon behavior. And with Astrid's future and more importantly their reputation on the line, she had been highly encouraged to seek other playmates, and prohibited from going to the forest. That was of course not the official story. Openly they covered up the affair by giving Astrid 5 new hobbies she had to learn, so she was simply too busy to hang out with Hiccup. It had hurt, but what had just most, was Astrid keeping up the lie, and not just telling Hiccup outright that her parents were embarrassed by him. Hiccup had avoided the forest from then on and nobody really got out here anymore. There were official training grounds for shifter training in the town, where people could try to train their dragon's talents. It was a safe place, with an official government lookout to step in if things got out of hand. A watcher they were called. Mostly they just sleep in their chairs overlooking the area, and let the shifters have fun on their own. Hiccup would prefer not having a local government official overlooking his every move and misstep. Again he would like to remain needle-free. Now Toothless and Hiccup needed a place away from prying eyes to train and discover together, where they wouldn't be disturbed. They have come across a cove, with a little lake, placed far and remotely into the forest. They wouldn't be disturbed there. They had sprinted out there the moment they had been left off, but only after they had sat through another torturous shifter lesson. Mildew was still just as grumpy and unhelpful as last time, and was not impressed with Hiccup's lack of progress. Hiccup disagreed. Now that he knew what kind of dragon he was dealing with, he knew better what to focus on. Still, he was not gonna tell Mildew that. Let him think he was a terror. Let them all think that. Hiccup was not ready to have all eyes on him, all the expectations of being Stoic's son and now with a rare dragon, that he may not be able to shift into. Everyone else was showing progress. Snotlout had even managed to grow a wing on his left arm, the arm elongating and hanging odd against his side, not matching the rest of his body. Hiccup made progress in his own way, trying to focus his dragon hearing and sight. He took his usual spot on the side, and sat listening to the gossip going around the gym, when Mildew left them to their own devices. Snotlout had at one time caught his eye, and comment ready on his lip, but Toothless would not have it, and Hiccup's eyes flashed green, and Snotlout's mouth closed shut. He looked confused around, but nobody had noticed them, so Snot went on with his friends, nobody none the wiser. Good. Hiccup was still trying to figure out why Toothless seems to have this power over the other dragons. Maybe it was a hierarchy thing. It was totally normal for dragons to establish their hierarchy in the early years, but because Hiccup was late to the party, his dragon would have to make an extra effort to find its spot. That was probably it. Toothless rumbled, pleased with himself. Hiccup shrugged it off, and tried to focus on a girl in the back that was complaining about how her claws crashed with her outfit. Definitely not listing in as Astrid ruffled her scales, and basked her wings, making her fellow students coo around her. Definitely not. It was hard, but Hiccup was getting better at controlling the talent. Toothless purred and barked with every progress, pride oozing over Hiccup in waves. Nothing Mildew had said at training had helped, and when Hiccup was standing in the middle of the cove trying to feel uttermost control, nothing happened. After a moment he gave up and fell back onto the ground with a moan. Maybe he wasn't cut out to be a dragon anyway. Toothless chucked, calling him silly. For some reason Hiccup's father's voice echoed in his head. It's all about trust. Hiccup sat up defeated and grabbed a nearby stick. He removed a few leaves from it, and stood up. Maybe someday he would understand what his father was talking about. With Toothless humming and watching, Hiccup began drawing in the dirt. He started with the eyes, then the flat nose, and wide mouth. Feeling out every bump and ridge down to the large ear flaps. Slowly the dragon took shape, and he could feel Toothless' appreciative nod in the back of his mind. He added the neck and stood back to admire his work. His shadow cast by the low-hanging sun aligned perfectly with the dragon drawn in the dirt, marking Hiccup's face the same level as the dragon's head. An ache washed over him. The wings were missing. Oh, what would he give to fly again? A shutter. Hiccup looked as his shadow grew and gave his drawn dragon wings. He yelped surprised and fell over, as large bat-like wings unfolded from him. They were larger than him, and he tripped on the tips, yelping both in pain and surprise. He went crashing down, his wings wrapping protectively around him on instinct as he went tumbling. He landed with a grunt. Unsure, Hiccup squinted his eyes. The light was coming through the black membrane, making Hiccup see clearly the texture and veins running through them. He wiggled one of his arms free to run his finger over the surface as the wings embraced him. They were strong. He could feel it. He made a frantic giggle. He had wings. He squirmed, trying to get the wings to unfold and let him get up. After a moment he gave up. They were not only his wings. A little help here, a chuckle, and the wings slowly unfolded around him to let the sunlight slip in. Hiccup sat up and ran his hands up and down the wings appreciatively. There were almost blue and purple spots running over them, changing color in the sunlight. Glistening in the light. They felt strong and powerful. Like they could carry him anywhere. It was like a foreign object attached to his body, but at the same time like a muscle he hadn't used for years and just had been made aware of. He stood and let the wings stretch behind him. He gave them a trying tug. He felt for Toothless in his mind. Feeling his presence and taking strength in it. He basked with them once, and saw as they sent the dirt flying. He laughed triumphantly and jumped to take off. Only to fall face first into the dirt, the wings not saving him this time. Toothless roared his laughter. Right, rookie mistake. Don't fly before you can crawl. Or walk. With a grunt he got up again. With more troubles than last, he got up very wobbly. The wings unbalanced him, making it easy for him to tumble over. He felt crooked, trying to compensate for the large appendix by leaning, ending with him down in a crouch not to fall over again. With a huff he placed his head between his knees. His lower back itched like crazy. The absent-minded scratched it. Toothless hummed. With a sigh Hiccup tried to stand, and fell over. Toothless groaned again, as Hiccup tried to use the wings to help him up. Frustration rushed through him, not sure if it were himself or his dragon responsible. He scratched his lower back again. It looked like he was walking home. Toothless made a pitiful frustrated noise deep in his throat, but Hiccup brushed him off and focused on letting his large useless wings retract into his back. Toothless huffed along the way, but in the end they disappeared, making Hiccup feel much lighter than before. A low grumble still echoed in his mind. Hiccup reached for his backpack only to hesitate. He looked down at his pink scale-free hand. He curled it and uncurled it, feeling a tingling sensation. Maybe flying had been too much for a first try. Maybe. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes. Toothless immediately stilled, feeling the shift in Hiccup. Hiccup opened his eyes with a snap, eyes piercing, pupils constricting into vertical slits, the green bleeding out the rest of his eyes. Slowly scales bobbled to the surface of his hand. When his focus stilled, a small cluster of scales covered his hand, and his nails were black like the night and slightly prolonged with pointy sharp tips. Hiccup grinned, feeling the power concentrated in his hand. A smugness that was not his own overtook him, and he left his backpack to stand in front of a nearby boulder. After much contemplation, but an encouraging roar from his dragon, Hiccup swiped at the rock with his dragon hand. His claws left long indentations in the rock. He was making progress. This time his smugness was all his own. Hiccup had trouble hiding his grin the next day. So what, he may be running around with black scales on his hand, and slightly black nails, that would not disappear no matter what he did. But he had done something. Something had worked. Unfortunately it only took one look from Astrid to crush his happiness, as memories of his failure clouded his progress. He still shuddered instantly. So he hid from her. Toothless did not approve, which made him cranky and unhelpful, as a constant annoyed hum in the boy's mind. It also left Hiccup with the unseen side effect that he growled at every dragon that came too near. Like his dragon's mood was bleeding through. The other students seemed to sense Toothless' bad temper, and they all seemed to disappear or retreat when Hiccup walked in the hall or entered a room. In class, when he took a seat, his neighbors seemed to find new seating arrangements fairly quickly, and the poor sod that did have to sit near Hiccup was suddenly very interested in their phone, book, or anything else than Hiccup's vicinity. Even the teachers seemed to give him a break, and skip him for questions in class. Hiccup appreciated that at least. Later a Gronkle had shoved past him in an empty hallway, and Hiccup had grabbed him by the collar and smacked him up against the wall, filled with annoyance and anger that was not his own, green dragon eyes boring into the Gronkle's orange, demanding he apologized. The Gronkle had whined and apologized. Then he ran as fast as his legs could carry him, leaving Hiccup speechless behind. Hiccup was beyond terrified of his own actions. Toothless refused to acknowledge what had happened, even when Hiccup pleaded at him. The confusion kept building up within. Hiccup could feel the divide between himself and Toothless more and more. That can't happen again. You hear me? He scolded the dragon, only for Toothless to huff annoyed. We don't hurt people. That's not how we get things done. You hear me? He shuddered as Toothless hissed. I know you're mad at me, but don't take it out on other people. Talk to me. Make me understand, please. Just don't hurt people. You're better than that. We're better than that. The dragon quieted, but Hiccup could still feel the swirling emotions threatening to spill out. The raw power alone petrified Hiccup, reminding him that Toothless was more than just a pet. The dragon could tear him apart if he wished. Toothless dwelled after that incident, taking out his disapproving emotions out on Hiccup rather than everyone else. But the damage had been done. Before long a rumor ran around the school that Hiccup's terror apparently had a spine, and teeth to match. Hiccup gravelled into his lunch, as he hid away. He had met Astrid in the doorway. Astrid has looked at him with wide eyes, something foreign and uncertain in her eyes. Could it have been fear? He never wanted to see something like it again. Not from her. Of course Mildew found out about his little stunt and pulled Hiccup to the front of his political history class and demanded he show off the strength of his dragon. When Hiccup couldn't do it, Hiccup spent the rest of the hour where Mildew insulted him in front of the rest of the spectators, while Hiccup talked down a very angry Toothless in his mind, chanting "We're better than violence, we're better than violence." The rest of the week was pure hell. Everywhere he went he bumped into Astrid, who looked either angry or uncomfortable. If Hiccup didn't know better he was sure she was following him. Still all the dragon's emotions filled him up, making it almost unbearable. Snotlout managed to corner him alone at one time, and Toothless in his still bad mood almost roared at him. Hiccup managed to close it off, and took most of the roar inside his mind, but he could feel the shift in Snotlout. His cousin managed to get one good gut punch in and then left Hiccup alone, with a seething Toothless. Toothless green dragon eyes had looked hateful after his cousin, defiance coming off him in waves, while Hiccup had whined on the inside, grabbing his stomach. He skipped the last class of the day and retreated to the cove where he licked his wounds, while trying to get better at controlling his claws. He came every day now, and it took time from other things. He hadn't done homework in he didn't know how long, and soon his teachers would notice, and surely tell Stoic. Hiccup was not ready for that conversation on top of everything else. His bike also suffered. He spent more time in the cove and less time in the workshop, and barely saw Gobber. With a wince Hiccup got up from the dirt, tired of feeling sorry for himself, and left the cove, clearly not getting anything done today. Nearly at the outskirts of the forest, he stopped dead in his tracks from a ruffling sound. Suddenly Toothless leapt to the front of his mind, ears peaked and eyes sharp as he moved forward to find the intruder. The prey. Afterwards Hiccup would not be able to tell what exactly had happened. He had just let go, and Toothless had taken over. Moving slowly, secretly and hidden low to the ground as they neared the hostile. Hiccup had jumped to his feet surprising his attacker. Only to come face to face with a half-shifted Astrid, claws out, and spikes at the ready as she prepared to fire at him. They both yelped and jumped to not collide, making Hiccup rolling around in the dirt. "What the hell is your problem?" Astrid yelled frustrated, as she caught her breath. "I could have killed you." Hiccup snorted and stood, dusting himself off. He seriously doubted that. "Don't flatter yourself." He huffed. "What did you just say?" Oh gods, he wanted to die. He ran a hand down his face and turned to face her off only to hesitate. "What are you doing out here? Are you following me?" To his surprise she fidgeted, "No I'm not." Hiccup scrunched up his nose in disbelief. Annoyance washed over him and he felt so over with this conversation. Over her presence. Whatever. Leave me alone, half Toothless, half himself. He hoisted up his backpack, and hurried back to the city, leaving Astrid to her own devices, not even looking back. It was getting harder and harder to separate his dragon's feelings from his own. Notes. Look who is growing a spine and showing some teeth. Definitely not Hiccup. Chapter 7, Snack Time. Summary. Hiccup gets confronted with harsh dose of reality and suffers accordingly. Rest of the school feels him spiraling. Also, what is up with Astrid and her sudden interest in him? Dumb teenage brain. Dumb dragon brain. Notes. Content warning, descriptions of a panic attack. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. The damage had been done, and most of the school went back to ignoring him. No one wanted to deal with an over-emotional terror. Someone would just get bitten on the nose. Hiccup knew he would never bite anyone, but the others didn't, and it worked in Hiccup's favor. Most of the time. It gave Hiccup a bit more free room to maneuver, but of course Snotlout still came to harass him from time to time. Sometimes Toothless stopped him in his tracks before Snot could make his approach. A part of him appreciated Toothless for his interference, another wished he didn't. It was causing him more problems in the end. Astrid seemed to also take the hint to leave him alone. He didn't find her lurking around anymore. A stupid part of his brain was despairing at the fact. Probably the foolish hormone-driven teenage part, while the dragon part just said good riddance. Since their meeting in the woods, Astrid and Hiccup seemed to go back into their usual day-to-day routine. The only difference was that now, Astrid looked like she wanted to say something every time she saw him, only to shake her head and look the other way. It hurt more than previous for some reason. Also now Hiccup's head seems to be buzzing with more than just his own dragon. And it only intensified with Toothless' dark mood. Hiccup had no idea what his dragon did. But now Hiccup had this feeling, the need to know, the need to soothe, to fix, to make everyone get along in his surroundings. So more than often they would just sit back and observe. Listen. Listen to the people around him, and furthermore their dragons. Just to make sure everyone was alright. It was like he could feel every dragon in his vicinity. It made his head hurt and his joints ache. He listened in and wanted to help. He was not sure why. He never felt the need to help other people like that before. People never cared about him, so why should he care about other people? Maybe for the exception of Gobber. And his father. Definitely his father. Still the urge to go help the other dragons around him, made Toothless even more irritable, which made Hiccup annoyed. It was an evil circle of destructive troughs and emotions. He felt the dragons' distress, not their human partners. No, their dragons. The urge to be destructive, to communicate better with their humans, to fly, to stretch their wings. Tense, dismissed dragons trapped in the back of their partner's mind. Hiccup felt them all. And the more he ignored them, the more his skin itched, and Toothless roared in his mind. It got so bad that he was twitching in class. Even more he could feel something was following him. Stalking and hunting him down. His senses and Toothless went into overdrive. It was only a matter of time before Snotlout had enough and snapped to take Hiccup head on, dragon or no dragon be damned. So Hiccup hung back after class, ready to confront his bully, with his backpack raised as a shield or ammunition if necessary. To his surprise it was not his cousin waiting for him, but Astrid who went into the open red door. They both yelped in surprise. Hiccup swayed to avoid pummeling her with his makeshift weapon, and Astrid jumped back not realizing he had been lurking in the shadows ready to jump her. "You're not Snotlout." Hiccup leaned up against the exposed brick wall, gripping his backpack close to his person. "Gee, what gave it away?" Astrid growled, as she straightened her braid and clothes. Small specks of blue were shining behind her right ear. "What are you doing?" Hiccup frowned. "Making sure I don't get beaten to death." Astrid rolled her eyes and pushed Hiccup in the left shoulder, almost whacking him upside the head, with a familiarity he hadn't experienced since they were both children. "No, I mean with your dragon." She planted her hands on her hips in her typical Astrid pose. "You're repressing him. Everyone can feel it." She gestured to him, then to around them. Hiccup blinked at her, as hot indignation and animosity flooded his veins. "I don't know why you suddenly care." Toothless hissed, furious in his mind. "Stop it, Hiccup, it's not like that." Astrid scolded, crossing her arms defensively. "You sure? Because if I remember correctly you told me that we're not friends anymore. That means you don't get to care what I do and not do anymore." He almost poked her in the chest, but stopped just before. He took a deep breath and took a step back. Hot air was filling up his lungs, and he could have been sure he would have breathed out smoke if he would have been able. A vibrant crimson blushed to life on Astrid's cheeks, and her eyes flared yellow, instead of her natural Arctic blue as she got right up in Hiccup's face. "It's not like that and you know it." Hiccup laughed humorlessly as Astrid reared back. "Oh, I know. Being a Horferson makes you better than everyone else, right?" She yelled, frustrated at him. "But you're a haddock, you were supposed to be better than everyone else, but you can't even do that, right?" The accusing tone made Hiccup roll his eyes. "You're right. I'm not a," but Astrid didn't let him finish and went right back into it, and got all up close in his face, fist clenched painfully at her side. "You're ruining everything. You ruined it then, and now you're ruining it again." She grabbed her hair, as Hiccup gaped, insulted at her. She clearly had thought about this, and now the truth was coming forth. Her glare landed on his, and her eyes had returned to their natural hue. With controlled breaths, she pointed at him, seething. We were supposed to be the best dragon's shifters on the island, but that didn't happen. Then you were supposed to be soulless and leave me alone, and now you're not. You have a dragon, and for some reason my dragon can't leave it alone. She looked broken, and on the brink of crying in anger, but too stubborn and too prideful to let the tears fall. You are messing up my life. I have a plan. A plan. She screamed in his face. Hiccup's ears were ringing, and he felt the urge to claw. To tear right through Astrid's perfect face. Your plan or your parents' plan? Before, she had once entrusted him with the pressure her parents had put on her, and now she was turning it on him. She has no idea. The nerve. She had no right. It was not his fault that he had been soulless most of his life. She had no idea what he had been through. What she had put him through, all because he didn't fit in the perfect picture Mr. and Mrs. Horferson had set for their daughter. For their entire family. Astrid knew he was right. Stay out of it, she growled, yellow back with full force. Hiccup glared back, his own eyes a blazing emerald. Sure, but you're the one following me, remember. He turned to leave, shrugging indifferently, but she closed the door in front of his face. He lifted an unimpressed eyebrow, as his pupils contracted. She heaved with the effort, but her own eyes turned blue. She straightened and flipped her braid over her shoulder. Her fringe did not obscure the hard stare. Just fix your dragon. It's making the whole school uncomfortable. Whatever you're doing, stop it. Stop repressing your dragon, or else you'll end up feral. To his surprise, she grabbed his arm, making the most of his anger frizzle out. I don't want that. Her voice was small. Barely audible if not for dragon hearing, and almost trembling, but still so hard it would be able to cut diamond. Did she care? Was she worried about him? Then she pushed him back, making him stumble, all fuzzy feelings gone. So get your shit together and fix it. Then maybe everyone can get one with their life. She rubbed her temple. Hiccup looked demurred around the room. I don't know what you're. She snorted, very ungracefully, making Hiccup shift away from her. She shook her head, and gathered her things. She checked her phone as she told him off like a small insolent child. Your dragon instincts. Follow them. Get an impulse. Follow it. If not, your dragon is gonna tear your brain apart. You didn't get the official school talk about feral. She hoisted up her backpack, and fell into the perfect unattainable image of Astrid Horferson, not a hair out of place, and no trace of what had just transpired. It's real and it happens. If your dragon tells you to do something, do it. It will make life easier for the rest of us. The door flew open, and she pushed past him and out in the hall. He buzzed with his emotions, but also toothless slow rumbling, the dragon just as agitated as him. Hiccup had barely got his bearings when he poked his head outside, and heard someone slow clap. He jumped in surprise as two figures then trapped him. That was incredible. You didn't die. Hiccup turned to see the twins leaning up against the wall. They had properly heard everything. Cautious Hiccup looked around. If the twins were here, then his cousin usually was not far away. Relax, Roughnut said cheerfully. We're skipping today. Not here to pummel your face. Then again if you offer. Tough lifted a fist, making Hiccup flinch by instinct and Toothless roar. They both laughed, but Hiccup winced. Toothless snarled precariously in his mind. With another grunt, Toughnut left his place on the wall and slung an arm around Hiccup. Hiccup almost jumped out of his skin at the careless contact, as Toughnut pulled him along to walk with him and his sister along the hallway. Tough wore a green beanie over what would probably become decent dread in a year or two. His dragon tooth necklace swung against his chest as they walked. Besides a large worn hoodie, he wore 2 layers of tank tops, one larger than the other with a band logo on the front. His sister was in similar attire with a tank top, sport bra and hoodie. But without a beanie, and her hair was in 2 long braids that went to her stomach. They swung in rhythm together with her dragon tooth necklace. Sometimes Hiccup wondered if they shared a wardrobe as well as brain cells. You're up to something. Tough Nut whispered, grin splitting his face in half. No, I'm not. Hiccup tried to find a way out of Tough Nut's grasp, but Rough Nut was standing near closing out his exit strategies. Her grin matched her brother's. Oh, you definitely are. The whole school can feel it. That dragon of yours is just waiting to burst out. Looks there is some little fight left in the little fellow, eh? Hiccup was shoved playfully in the shoulder by Rough Nut, while Tough Nut messed up his hair. They pushed him off them and stood in front of him with excitement vibrating through them. Point is, when you go feral, give us a heads up. Tough Nut winked at him. Hiccup, who had just got his bearings, looked confused at them as he adjusted his backpack, and tried to pat down his hair. We wanna watch as you tear through campus. Rough Nut elaborated with a shrug. The thought of that much chaos and destruction. Tough Nut nodded, mimicking a rupture with his hands. We'll have to take notes. Hiccup looked at Rough Nut. Study it. Hiccup looked at Tough Nut. They seamlessly finished each other's train of thoughts. Uncontrollable chaos and destruction. Rough Nut sighed, while her brother got teary-eyed, and leaned on her for support. The bear thought, magnificent. Excuse me, I need a moment. Rough Nut clapped her brother on the shoulder and pushed forward. Keep up the good work, useless. Looking forward to all the chaos you're gonna create. Then they walked off, laughing, leaving Hiccup speechless and a little startled behind. He sank down against the nearest wall to get ground himself, Toothless chuffing unhelpful in his mind. Hiccup looked after the two as they walked away. He had felt their bond. Their bond to their dragon, the hideous Ziplyback, but still from Rough Nut. There was something else from her too. She seemed unbalanced somehow. That was the only way he could describe it, and the way she leaned and clung to her brother, like he was the only reason keeping her sane. It was weird. Even for them. But fascinating. Hiccup briefly wondered if he could help her. Then he came to his senses, when he heard how terrible and ridiculous that sounded. Hiccup tried to continue as everything was normal. Holding on to the illusion with both clawed hands. His new routine included avoiding Snotlout, sending glares at Astrid, mostly toothless contribution, fleeing to the cove to train, eat and work at Gobbus, trying to do some homework, and pass out on top of it, only to wake up in his bed later in the night, probably his dad doing, and all in all trying to keep his mind from spiraling and not go feral or primal in any way. He could feel Toothless fighting him along the way, when the dragon felt Hiccup react in a way he didn't approve of. Every time he neared another dragon, he could feel these ridiculous impulses to help the dragon. The dragons that hated him. The sealed dragon was the worst. Their cry for help in the back of their human partners' minds were the worst, and Hiccup was not sure of how to help them. Toothless bristled at every dragon they passed, and Hiccup ignored it, agitation growing inside them. How was Hiccup supposed to help them? He couldn't even help himself. He was getting better at his talents, but all in all was going nowhere. He couldn't keep Snotlout off his back. He couldn't talk to his father, only disappointing him. He couldn't talk to Gobber. He most certainly couldn't talk to Astrid. He couldn't trust to talk to anyone about Toothless, and how the dragon was slowly corroding his mind. Still the instinct to protect, shield, help and ease flooded him. From time to time the twins would pop up and ask him how close he was to exploding. Still hanging on. He told them with biting sarcasm, and they would moan disappointed and then went on their way. Still, it got worse, and as Hiccup walked through the entrance to school one cold autumn morning, he could feel the breaking point. All the dragons complaining, all the dragons in need. It was torture, so Hiccup did what he did best. He fled and hid. But on the way he bumped into Fishlegs, almost knocking himself over. Hiccup had sprinted with his head down, hands pressed to his ears to drain out the cries from the dragons. He didn't see where he was going and burst right into Fishlegs. The larger boy steadied him, and Hiccup almost fell over. Oh, hi there. Are you okay? Fishlegs looked Hiccup over, frowning at Hiccup's shivering form. Just splendid, why you ask? Hiccup said, twitching, trying not to clamp his hands over his ears again. Fishlegs hummed cynically, nodded and looked around. Oh no. He swore and looked at his spread out belongings. Hiccup just realized he had made Fish Legs drop all the things he had been holding. His hands twisted around the strap of his backpack. A paper bag full of snacks had spilled all its contents over the hole, and Fish Legs's phone had skittered across the linoleum floorboards. Hiccup quickly ducked to retrieve it, while Fish Legs gathered his food. Here. Sorry. Hiccup held up the phone, which was barely untouched. It's all right. Fish Legs took his phone back and hoisted up his paper bag. Hiccup just stared at him. Your dragon eyes are out. Fish Legs pointed out, lifting his finger to point. You sure you're okay? Yeah. Hiccup said, breathless, still staring. You're hungry? He said, dumbfounded. Fish Legs blinked at him, then chuckled nervously. Yeah, no kidding. Always but no matter how much I eat. He shrugged. Still hungry? Hiccup nodded, and a light went up in him. Wait here. He said, holding his hands up, and ran out the building again, leaving Fish Legs shouting confused after him. Wait. Still Hiccup jumped out the door, and flung himself on the banister and slid down the railing, only to jump off the side, making students and teachers scatter at his interruption of the flow. They yelled after him, teeth bared, and claws threatening, but Hiccup drowned them out, focusing on his task. He skidded to a hold near the school garden that held a pathway paved with loose gravel. Hiccup scooped out a couple of hands full of the gravel, and emptied into his pocket, dashing back into the school to Fish Legs. But Fish Legs was not where he left him, and Hiccup stalked down the aisles to find him. His nose flared trying to catch the scent of the boy. He found him as the boy was about to enter his classroom. Fish Legs! Hiccup cried out triumphantly. The other boy froze, and looked uncomfortable around. Hiccup noticed it too, but couldn't care less. Fish Legs had met up with his friends, and Snotlout, rough and tough, looked confused at the incoming Hiccup, with Astrid taking a step back, ready to pounce defensively. Snotlout opened his mouth to say something, but Hiccup growled at him, "Not now, Snot. Go away." And to his surprise Snotlout did. He just left the doorway and walked into the classroom without complaining. The others stared after him. Here. Hiccup pulled out the gravel, and poured it into Fish Legs' paper bag, and one of his outstretched hands. Fish Legs blinked frightened at the gravel, and shrugged his shoulders in confusion. Thanks. Behind him, Tough Nut twirled his fingers near his temple, making a cuckoo sound. Ruff snorted, but Astrid gaped at the gravel. Eat it. What? Fish Legs almost jumped, and a little of the pile crackled onto the floor. It will help. Trust me, Hiccup ensured him. He wrapped both his hands around Fish Legs' fist, making him close it around it, and pressing the fist towards himself. Fish Legs blinked at him hesitantly. Trust me, Hiccup insisted pleadingly. Toothless hummed excited in Hiccup's mind. Ah. Fish Legs looked back to his friends, but the twins just nodded, daring him to eat it, and Astrid crossed her arms, sending Hiccup a glare. Okay. Fish Legs agreed thoughtfully, and Hiccup retracted with a relieved sigh. Fish Legs lifted his fist to inspect the gravel, before he shrugged and chucked the handful into his large mouth. The gravel crunched loudly, as he chewed. Chewed. The gravel breaking into tiny pieces under the boy's gronkle teeth. Fish Legs bended over with a moan. Astrid tried to go to him, ready to tear Hiccup a new one, but Fish Legs stopped her. So, good, he smacked his lips, and burped. So, good. His hand went down to his belly. The taste. I never knew. So good, and I'm. He looked surprised. I'm not hungry anymore. What? Astrid and the twins cried. Stunned, Tough Nut insisted, but you're always hungry. Apparently not anymore. Fish Legs turned to face Hiccup. Thank you, Hiccup. How did you do? I helped. I actually helped. Hiccup's voice croaked. Yeah. Yeah, you did. Thanks, man. Fish Legs reached out to pat Hiccup on the shoulder, but retracted his hand as bitten, when Hiccup sank to his knees exhausted and shuddering. I helped. Suddenly it felt like part of a burden had been lifted off Hiccup's shoulders. Not everything, but something. He had no idea how heavy it had been, as he sank to his knees with the bas-relief. He felt something next to him, but all he could focus on was Toothless. Everything else blurred around him. The dragon stretching and moving in his mind. Stronger and more powerful, but content and proud. Happy with Hiccup. It was getting hard to breathe. He could sense more dragons gathering to gawk at him. He barely registered the twins howling if he was gonna blow. Hiccup heaved. His vision was fussy, and all he could feel was his dragon. The overwhelming feeling, as his body ached, trying, craving the shift, begging him to let go. Everything was woozy, and the pressure was crushing him. Someone helped him up and pulled him away. All he could do was follow. He registered being pulled into a small room, and a door shut, leaving him in darkness. Someone was there with him. He sank down against a wall, and pushed stuff aside to make room for himself. A mop fell and landed heavy on the floor. Supply closet, his head noted. There was some roughing and Astrid turned on the single light bulb in the closet. Hiccup squinted his eyes up at her. She sank down to her knees to sit with him. Hiccup's hands had somehow gone to cover his ears and now, Astrid slowly pried them from his head. "Breathe," she said. Her voice washed over him like a calming wave. Slowly. In, she inhaled and held her breath. And out, she exhaled. "Focus on my voice." Hiccup did. "Can you hear me?" Hiccup nodded a little slowly. "Can you understand?" He nodded again. There was a calming air around her. Hiccup wanted to breathe it in. Stick his nose in her hair and just breathe. "I'm gonna sit down next to you." "Okay. Okay." Astrid moved closer but hesitated. "Can I touch you?" He nodded, and gulped as Astrid lay an arm around him, and stroked his back soothingly. In and out. Hiccup repeated, his breath leveling. He blinked. Toothless was terrified. Terrified for him. Cooing and barking softly at him, trying to comfort him. He had almost fainted in the hallway, Hiccup realized disbelievingly. Toothless huffed unamused. "What happened?" Astrid asked slowly. She was close. Her blue eyes level with his, and her breath tickling his ear. "I helped." His voice broke halfway through the words. But Astrid was unnaturally gentle with him and eased him on. "Yes, you did." She smiled, and it sent another burst of heat through his very being. "Why?" Her voice was smooth and soft. "I had to." Hiccup held his head high, as Toothless purred. "He told me to." "Your dragon?" Astrid said curiously. Her hair was such a nice blonde color. "I had to." She was in pain. "Not a lot. Less than the others. But I could help her." Hiccup tried to get to the right words. To explain what had happened with Meatlug. With Fishlegs and his dragon. How he had heard, felt her. Astrid shook his arm slightly to get him to concentrate. Who? Who is she? Who are the others? The other dragons. Dragons all around him. Dragons that needed help. But not now. He had been asked a question. The dragon. Fishlegs' dragon. She was hungry. So I fed her. Gronkles eat rocks. They need it for the lava in their stomachs. Her inside must be tearing without the rock. Baffled, Astrid blinked at him, her soft mouth changing into a small O. "I helped." Hiccup repeated. "I helped." He fell back against the wall, shuddering. "I helped." Astrid shifted and rubbed his arm. "You did good." He looked at her, and the soft smile was back. "Your dragon is gonna be better now. You need to find a way to share. Don't let it come to this again. He will tear you apart." Toothless hissed, insulted. "He would never do that." Hiccup snarled, feeling his teeth shift, and his pupils turning into slits. Astrid stared back at him, her own dragon eyes on display, ready to face the challenge. Hiccup was surprised and sank back a bit. Still his eyes out, but a little more appeased. "Not on purpose," he added. Astrid nodded, and also her dragon's featured retracted. Only a small rumbling sound. He was not sure if it was Toothless or Stormfly who was purring. Then continue to do what he tells you to do. She sounded breathless, but nodded at him with confidence. A confidence he didn't believe in. He buried his head between his knees, wrapping his arms around them, shielding him from the outside. I can't. A hand grabbed his chin and forced him to look into Astrid's dragon eyes. They were strong flies yellow, but he recognized the fire as Astrid's. Yes you can. You're Hiccup Haddock, you can do anything. She hadn't spoken to him like that since they were kids. Hadn't believed in him since then. Her faith back then had been unwavering, so sure of their promise for greatness. Right now Hiccup could not follow her. There are so many. He said, his voice shaking. There were so many dragons that needed help. Tears that were not his pricked at his eyes, as he reached out and grabbed Astrid's hand. She shifted her grip, so her hand rested against his cheek instead. It felt almost kind. He still hasn't moved his own hand, and she allowed him to grip her wrist while she stroked his cheek. Start small, she said. Her small smile reminded him of sunny days with bare feet in the moss, and made him tingly all over. You can't save the whole world, she was so close to him. Her other hand moved to rub his other cheek. His hand flopped into his lap with astonishment. Her voice was velvet to his ears. Start small. Little things to make their life easier. I think it will help your dragon. It's a nesting dragon. It thrives on the well-being of his flock. Hiccup licked his lips and gulped. I don't have a flock, he said breathlessly. There was a small chuckle from Astrid. So your dragon is projecting. Everything and everyone is its flock. Get your own flock. Then maybe his tendencies will be more manageable. Until then start small, she tilted her head, and there was that spark in her eyes that always made him grin. She sat back on her haunches. He wanted her to hold his face again. Okay. Small, he nodded, eager to please her, but stopped as he got dizzy. He dragged a hand over his face. Thanks. How do you know all this? She grinned and shuffled to sit down next to him again. I'm the best student in this school. I know everything. Of course. He snorted, but felt the strength returning to his bones. Thanks, Astrid. You didn't have to. I did. Her answer was unwavering. They looked each other over. Truce? She asked. He nodded truce. But before he could take her outstretched hand, the door to the closet flew open. What the hell is going on here? Mildew poked his angry head inside, and then ducked to avoid a slew of perfectly aimed spikes coming for his head. Hiccup heaved from his confined position. He had been pushed behind and against Astrid, who now held him tight with one arm, while the other was outstretched protectively, claws at the ready. She hissed as her newly formed tail sent the spikes flying. Her eyes burned yellow in the dim light, scales bloomed across her cheeks, and he hissed ferociously. A crown of spikes poked through her hair. She looked glorious, and Hiccup was smitten, even as he was flushed against her chest. He tried not to notice how good she smelled, or how nice her boobs felt under his cheek, but instead just listened to her vivid heartbeat. He had barely had a moment to breathe, before another round of spikes was shot and Mildew ducked out and closed the door behind him. Astrid heaved and got to her feet, extending her hand to help Hiccup up. That was something. But Hiccup kept getting distracted by Astrid's tail. He started hypnotic at it from his seat on the ground. How do you even stand? How come you don't fall over? Astrid shrugged, a little flushed. The tail keeps me balanced. She gestured to her outstretched hand again. Your tail, he heaved, and Toothless chuffed. I have a tail. He shouted, directly into Astrid's face. She comically withdrew her hand, blinking unnerved at him. Okay. She squinted at him as he chuckled. Astrid, you're brilliant, he launched out and embraced her. She froze in his grasp, and with some weird impulse, he smacked a kiss on her cheek, and ran out the room, leaving a shell-shocked Astrid behind him. Thanks, Astrid. Notes. So yeah, there is more to Toothless than let on. He is after all special. The dragons can tell more than their humans. They are animals, and can sense things before any human can. But I love to spruce things up with more awkward teenage drama and hormones in between. Either to mix canon and non-canon with the books, films and series. So glad so many of you notice. I do try not to follow everything to the letter just to keep everything interesting. That is also why Toothless is very sometimes, and also Hiccup to some degree. Plus Hiccup will not realize he kissed Astrid before years in the future, where he wakes up in the middle of night and cringes. Chapter 8, Growing Pains. Summary. It is not all sunshine and sparkles to be a dragon. Sometimes it hurts like hell. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Hiccup woke up groaning in pain. Throughout the night his legs had ached and woke him up multiple times. His jaw, gums and teeth hurt, like he was growing an extra pair of teeth. Which he knew he was not. He had tried to rub the aching muscles in his legs, but it only dulled the pain. Needless to say he didn't sleep much that night. Toothless had hummed soothingly at him through the night to help him through the worst, but Hiccup had still squirmed around in his agony when the pain was worst, shuddering, sweating and groaning. He had felt a small ache, almost cramp, after his sessions with Toothless in his limbs, but it always subsided. Nothing like this. Toothless kept humming, "It would pass, it would pass." Toothless had been more cooperative since Hiccup's meltdown after helping Fish Legs. The dragon seemed more aware of Hiccup's boundaries, but still pushed him to try to help the other dragons. To appease the dragon, Hiccup followed the advice and went small. He could not save everyone. But he gave pebbles to Fish Legs, found a crowbar for an itchy nightmare so they could reach between their wings, and handed a cheese grater to an annoyed Nadder to help with the dead scales. He gave a first aid kit to 2 dragons that got into a fight. Wrapped another Nadder's hand in a paper towel when they accidentally smashed a canned soda and drenched themselves. Fixed a broken wheel on a bike, to help a Gronkle get to school on time. Shared his sandwich with a hungry Terror. Small things. Not that he was getting acknowledged for his efforts by the humans, but there was a small ping of gratefulness from their dragons. It soothed Toothless though, so it soothed Hiccup, and his head didn't feel like it was gonna split in two all the time. After that, Toothless was also much more into their continuous training of their talents. With the revelation from Astrid, he now knew he needed a tail to fly. To keep him balanced and not fall over. He had still not managed to summon both wings and a tail at the same time. Either one or the other, and the effort strained his muscles and left him exhausted after. His body still did not shift to accommodate for the appendices, and they always felt heavy and unnatural. Last night he managed to summon his tail in full size, and got to admire the fins at the base of the tail, and the 2 large ones at the end, he could control at will. He had walked away with a dull ache, satisfied with last night's effort and results. Today was another case. Hiccup stretched his neck, rubbing a sore spot, and stumbled down to the kitchen downstairs. Stoic was on his way out, but stopped in his tracks when he saw his son. Hiccup rolled his neck and scratched his head, as he made his way over to the table. Then sat down with a hiss, and lifted his left leg up to rest on the other chair, while he rubbed his shin, trying to soothe the screaming muscle. "Son?" His dad asked from the doorway, travel mug with coffee already in one hand, and case file in the other, one shoe already on. "I'm fine, Dad, just didn't sleep well." Hiccup opened and closed his mouth, trying to relieve the pain, as a jab shot through his jaw. Toothless rumbled in his chest. Hiccup gave him a reassuring tug. Are you all right?" Stoic asked, tilting his head in worry. Hiccup looked at the clock on the wall. His father had a morning briefing in 22 minutes. Just enough time for him to get to the station if he left now. Hiccup exhaled. "I'm fine. Just a little sore." He jumped startled as the travel mug and case file landed in front of him as Stoic stormed back in the kitchen. "Dad." Hiccup tried to get his father's attention, but Stoic did not hear him. "It's completely normal to be in pain. Your body is adjusting to your dragon. You are having growing pains. Before long you will probably sprout taller than me." The large man stood on his toes as he went through kitchen cabinet upon kitchen cabinet. "I will." Hiccup seriously doubted that, considering his dad was over 2 meters tall, but his dad just nodded vigorously. When I presented, I grew 2 feet practically overnight. I was of course much younger than you, but the pain will be the same. Where did I put Stoic explained. Hiccup watched awestruck as his father ransacked through their medicine cabinet. He appeared victorious with a packet, only to frown. Expired, of course. I brought this years ago, around the time all the other kids presented, waiting for you to be next. The packet landed on the table as Stoic went over to the freezer and stuck his head inside. You never did, of course, and I completely forget to replace them. Hiccup looked at the packet that said, Bucket's famous tooth relief. It looked like it was full of gum. Here. Stoic had returned with a bowl of ice cubes. Suck on one of those for a bit, it will help with the pain. Your dragon's teeth are trying to push your own out, and until they figure things out, it's gonna hurt like hell. Then he was off again, running out of the kitchen. Hiccup blinked after his father as he carefully put a cube in his mouth. I will run to the store after work and get you some new ones, but until then cold water and cubes. His father ran past the kitchen door. In search of something. Hiccup nodded thoughtfully as the chill cooled his gums. Here. Stoic returned with some towels. One he wrapped around Hiccup's shoulders, and Hiccup gripped it to keep it there. Leg up. Stoic instructed, and Hiccup stuck out his leg, and Stoic pulled up the pajama's legs, and carefully wrapped each appendix in a towel. Then he planted his son's feet in a washing bowl and left, leaving Hiccup perplexed, waiting for him. Now. He appeared again with a boiling tea kettle. When had he put that on? This may be weird, but it will help. It's not gonna burn you. Trust me. Stoic looked into his son's eyes, and planted a comforting hand on his shoulder. It may hurt a little at first, but you're a Viking. You are a dragon. He gave his son a reassuring squeeze, and Hiccup felt the love radiating from his father. A strange warmth flooded Hiccup's chest at his father's smile. Nodding once, Hiccup knew that strangely enough, he fully trusted his father despite all their differences. Stoic nodded again. His hands changed, getting covered with scales as he grabbed the boiled kettle and poured the scalding hot water over Hiccup's wrapped legs. Hiccup yelled, but was surprised when it did not burn or melt his skin, but instead soothed and relieved the ache. Huh? Hiccup wondered. His father knelt down in front of him, and used his dragon hands to gently massage Hiccup's legs with the towels, keeping the water and heat trapped inside. Your dragon is made of fire, burning deep inside their core. They do not burn, and neither will you. Your dragon will not let you. If you trust him completely. Surprised, Hiccup looked down at his father as he worked. I do. Toothless hummed, content inside him. Good. Stoic nodded, keeping his focus on his son's legs. They sat in silence as Stoic worked. How is that? He asked after a good quarter of an hour. Hiccup gingerly stretched his leg. Much better. Thanks, Dad. Of course. He started to unwrap Hiccup legs and remove the bowl, and offered Hiccup more ice he could chew on. That should give you some hours. We will repeat the process, when you get home and before bed. Oh, okay. Hiccup nodded while chewing on his ice, and dried the last water off his legs. Get your things, I'm driving you to school. Stoic left to throw the towels in the washer. What? But Dad, Hiccup protested, trying to stand but had to sit down again as pain shot through his leg. Normally he would either walk or take his bicycle, but from time to time his dad would have time to drive him. No, you're not walking all the way to school, when you are having growing pains. I will deliver and pick you up for school, until we're sure you pull through. Stoic's disembodied voice rang through the house. But Dad! Hiccup yelled, while Toothless chuckled at his distress. This is serious, Hiccup. Stoic's face appeared in the door frame. You do not run, or overexert your limbs, when you're growing. They will become crooked. Then he left again. Hiccup scrunched up his nose in frustration. Stoic appeared with a set of clothes that Hiccup could put on in the downstairs bathroom, as he refused to let Hiccup walk up the stairs, no matter how much Hiccup protested. Which meant Stoic had to run back up the stairs, to get some different clothes, as the ones he picked were from his washing pile. Remember old Bellsprout? Stoic yelled from upstairs, rummaging through drawers. Hiccup leaned on the stairs banister shouting instructions to his father, where to find clean clothes. The one with the cane. The sound of shuffling and a drawer being closed echoed from upstairs. Yes, ran around the whole island, while his dragon was growing. Now he has 2 bad knees, crooked bones and needs a cane to walk. Do not push your dragon. Stoic marched down the stairs and presented his son with a new pile of fresh clothes. All right. His father nodded at him. Hiccup had to remember not to roll his eyes. All right. He agreed. Stoic rewarded him by patting him on the shoulder, making Hiccup feel like he was sinking further down into the floor with each pat. Good. Now get ready, you're gonna be late. This time Hiccup did roll his eyes as his father ushered him into the bathroom. He emerged to his father still running around the house to find all Hiccup's school supplies and drop it in his backpack. Hiccup would help, but was stopped each time and forced to sit at the kitchen table. Hiccup looked at the watch on the wall. They were gonna be late. Dad! He yelled. Stoic looked at him worried for a moment, until Hiccup gestured to the clock, then he started running faster and shouting at Hiccup to get in the car. Come on, come on. Stoic flew around gathering the last bits and pieces while locking up. Dad! Hiccup tried to interrupt but was overruled. Come on Hiccup. Stoic stood in the door gesturing the boy out, breath staggered with all the running he had done. Hiccup rolled his eyes, went into the kitchen. Your case file. Hiccup waved the red file over his head. Stoic slapped his forehead and grabbed it along with his phone. Oh thanks Thor, good you remembered. Then Hiccup was half dragged, half carried out the door and in front of the patrol car door. Now into the car, do you need help? I'm fine Dad. Hiccup assured him as he entered the vehicle. Stoic threw his case file in the seat behind him, and entered the car. Right. Then they were off. Inside the kitchen the travel mug was left cold and forgotten on the table. Stoic did not speed to Hiccup's school, he was an officer of the law. But Hiccup did have to grab the handlebar a couple of times as Stoic took the swings at a higher speed than necessary. Slightly shaken Hiccup exited the car in front of the school with only 5 minutes to the bell. Stoic leaned over the gear shift to talk to Hiccup as he got out. You have your ice? Stoic asked, clearly still concerned, but with his typical no-nonsense attitude back in place. Hiccup stuck out his tongue where a half-melted cube glistened. Stoic nodded and handed Hiccup his backpack, but not before he patted it and said. I packed you a heating pad, just heat it in the cafeteria microwave, if you can't get another dragon to blow fire on it. Dad. And a cooler with more ice. I will get the packet and then, Stoic patted the backpack once more. Dad. Hiccup chided and took the bag. Stoic nodded a little worried, but then leaned back in his seat and started the car. Right. Ah. Have a good day son, I love you very much. Hiccup halted at slamming the car door closed to just look at his father for a moment. His dad smiled awkwardly at him, but there was nothing but truth behind his words. Hiccup felt his own flustered smile overtake his face. I love you too Dad. Then he smacked the car door shut, his dad still just sitting there a little surprised and mumbling to himself. Good. Go. Hiccup laughed and patted the roof, shaking his dad out of his stupor. Right, bye. With a chuckle he watched his father driving out of the parking lot. Bye Dad. He yelled, waving goodbye. His newfound serenity didn't last. The moment his dad's car was out of sight, he could feel it. The looks and the snickers. Most of the last stranglers had hurried inside, but there were a couple of seniors looming at the entrance. They chuckled and mocked Hiccup as he walked towards the door. Wondering why on earth Hiccup was being dropped off like a preschooler, too loud for the intention to be Hiccup not to hear. Hiccup lifted his chin and continued. They could say what they want. He would not let them ruin such a rare moment with his father. Toothless chuffed and rumbling growls vibrated through Hiccup. Hiccup had just passed the bunch when the baby sounds began. The seniors, 2 gronkles and a nada, Hiccup has no idea why he suddenly knew this, were making kissy noises, and baby girls, suckling their thumbs and laughing their asses off. Hiccup faltered in his tracks as the anger overtook him. But Toothless' calming bark made him stop. Hiccup quickly took a breath and continued up the stairs. That was when one of the gronkles laughed, that he had never seen anything so pathetic as the chief telling his son that he loves him. Hiccup froze. Toothless went silent. His ears were ringing, there was a fire building in his core and he felt like time was going in slow motion as he turned and snarled, Toothless putting all his weight behind it. Not a growl, or a roar or a hiss, but a warning. The three boys flinched. They huddled together as the fear spiked in their eyes. Hiccup held eye contact for 3 more seconds before he walked off. He could feel the relief as the boys tumbled down, grabbing each other and gasping for air. Hiccup entered the school with a sudden burst of confidence. The noise was overwhelming. Hiccup looked around the cafeteria, and sighed at the sight of the long line to the student microwave oven. Fire control was apparently still not the most controlled abilities as most students reheated their lunch using technology, instead of their talent. Here, give it. Hiccup yipped startled, but handed his heating pad to Astrid's extended hand. She walked away and Hiccup had no other option than to follow. The truce was still ongoing, so Hiccup and Astrid were still pretty civil with each other. The day after Hiccup's meltdown, Hiccup had come up to Astrid only for Astrid to squeak and run away. Later she found him again, punched him, and then they never spoke of it again. Now they said hi in the hallway, and that was an improvement in Hiccup's book. Astrid had even reduced her glaring quota to only when Hiccup outperformed her in class. All in all, improvement. They sat down at a table way in the back. She put her lunch tray down, and blew on the pouch. A blue, soft flame left her lips and caressed the item. After a couple of minutes she handed it back to him. Careful, it's hot. Thanks, Astrid. Hiccup sighed with relief as the pouch heated up his leg. It had begun thunking like mad during the last period, and he had almost limped to the cafeteria, when the bell rang. Astrid didn't say more, just nodded and started eating her chicken. Hey cause. Hiccup looked up and saw Snot, Fish Legs and the twins joining their table. Hiccup could not help the snarl and growls that escaped his lips. I swear, Snot Loud, if you... Whoa, it's cool. Snot Lod took a step back holding his hands up in surrender. The others hid behind him. Toothless snarled inside him, and he could feel his own lip curl and his eyes zoom in on the four like they were prey. After a moment Hiccup nodded and Snot and the others literally deflated. Hiccup continued to give them stink eyes as they sat down, with a safety distance of 2 chairs around him. He eyed his cousin with suspicion. Snot Loud still stared at him, but seemed in a good mood today, which meant his father was off the island. He even chuckled. Nice to know there is some fight in the terror of yours. Snot Loud commented as he sat down. Hiccup was ready with another snarl, but Snot lifted his hand, calming, No, you misunderstand. We've all been there. The rest of the table nodded, making Hiccup even more uncomfortable. I remember the growing days. They sucked. I basically stayed home. Hardcore of you show up. Snot Loud shrugged, unnaturally friendly. The twins nodded. Hiccup gave them all suspicious glares. He was pretty sure his dragon eyes were out, but he did not care, and neither did Toothless. He was too tired, too much in pain to care. Yeah, I remember one time, Tough Nut launched into an anecdote where he wanted to gnaw his own leg off, and how his sister offered to do it instead. Hiccup sat the entire lunch stunned as the friends talked and joked around him like he was part of their flock. Fish Legs chipped in with a story from his history class, where one of the nadders sneezed and set fire to his book. The others laughed and continued talking about their classes. Hiccup did notice that Snot kept looking at Astrid, who pointedly ignored him. Maybe she had talked to him. Got him off Hiccup's back for now. Hiccup felt skittish and wanted to run away, but Toothless kept him in his place, backing him up and reassuring him, as he slowly ate his lunch. Out of the corner of his eyes he saw movement. Not a lot, but a flutter. Discreetly he dropped his napkin and bent down to look under the table, where he saw Rough Nut's right legs basically vibrating. He remembered the feeling he had last time he saw her and took a moment to look at her. Her left eye was twitching, but she covered it up by blinking at the right time. Her fingers were twitching, fidgeting, always doing something, while her eyes darted around the room, to her friends, her brother and her lunch, not knowing where to focus, while she sat silent and let the other do the talking. He did not know why, but he asked her anyway, going with the impulse he now had come to recognize as a push from his night fury. Hey Rough Nut. The whole pack turned to look at him, stopping what they were doing, giving him all their attention. Hiccup extended his closed fist and opened it to reveal the bundled up napkin. The others grunted disappointed, but Ruff's eyes were focused on the ball. Bet you can't hit the trash can over there. Hiccup dared. Ruff's eyes followed his eyes and saw the trash can, where at least a dozen people were passing by. Oh yeah. A wicked grin spread over her face and she lifted her arm to throw, but Hiccup interrupted her, also gaining the attention of her twin. Without hitting anybody. Both twins turned to look at him confused. Hiccup's smirk was undeniable, but he had them now. Anybody can hit a fool in the head. No, the real trick is not to hit anybody. Tough and Rough eyes darted around the student bodies that hustled past the can. Now that takes skills. Hiccup twirled his fork around lazy. I can do it. Rough Nut said, almost breathless. Something flashed in her eyes, and Hiccup snorted. Oh yeah. Hiccup mocked her with her own response. Rough Nut snorted herself and stood up to better take aim. Her brother watched with undivided attention. His hands completely still on the table. Rough Nut went to her tiptoes, and let the paper ball fly. Their table followed the projectile and Tough Nut high-fived his twin. Rough Nut cheered triumphantly, when the ball hit its target. Bet I could do it better. Tough Nut protested, standing to match his sister. Rough Nut crossed her arms. Well, too bad, no more balls. Actually. Hiccup snooked. They both focused on Hiccup. There are balls all around. He made a vague gesture to their surroundings. They all looked around at the discarded napkins around the tables. Here are the rules. They snapped back to Hiccup again, ready to receive the information. You have to stand where you picked up the napkin. You get full points if you hit the can in one go. Minus points if you hit a person on the way. You have to the bell rings. Fish Legs will take points. Fish Legs looked surprised and a little scared but nodded. Confident Hiccup mirrored him, as he started the countdown. Ready. Set. Go. Then the twins were off, and Hiccup forced on shifting his heating pad over to his other leg. Fish Legs, Astrid and Snotlout stared at him with open mouths. What? Hiccup asked, a bit annoyed. How did you do that? Fish Legs pointed a shaking finger at Hiccup. Do what? Uninterested in the conversation, Hiccup bit into his sandwich. That. Fish Legs kept shaking his finger at the other boy. You managed the twins. They all looked at the twins as they ran around clearing out the napkins. They are cleaning up. Hiccup took another bite as Fish Legs shrieked at him voluntarily. Hiccup just shrugged as Tough Nut shouted, what's the score? You're still tied, better hurry up. Hiccup shouted, then went back to his lunch. When they left the cafeteria, all the napkins were cleaned up and Tough and Rough discussed who won, on each side of Hiccup, as he kept insisting they were tied, showing off a paper with a random number of tied lines. Rough gave him a grateful smile and Hiccup winked at her. Behind them Astrid missed a step, making Fish Legs grab her so she did not fall. Hiccup looked back at them, but Astrid glared back, so Hiccup quickly looked away. He left the others to get some stuff in his locker for his next class. He was not prepared for the fist that knocked into the locker beside him, making him jump. Then he was lifted by his collar. He knew it had been too good to be true. Snotlout growled at him. I don't know what you're up to, but stop it. Toothless fumed inside him, but Hiccup could do nothing more than hold on to his shirt, as it tried to choke him. You don't get to waltz in here, with your teeny tiny terror, and worm your way into my pack, you hear me? Snotlout's meaty finger poked Hiccup in the ribs, with only the hint of claws. I don't know what you did to get to Astrid, but it stops here. You hear me? He shook Hiccup for good measure. Knock it off. He let him go, by shoving Hiccup into his own locked locker. Know your place, you freak show. Hiccup coughed and chopped, feeling his neck bruising as Snotlout walked away. The dragon in his mind buzzed, and a headache he had familiarized himself with threatened its way back. Small things. Hiccup needed the attacks to stop, or else Toothless would take it into his own claws, and Hiccup was not sure Snotlout would survive if it happened. He needed to master his talents. At least to put up a fight. He had to do better. Notes. I like the idea that there is no magic transformation. Your body is fighting for dominance with an invasive species, and have to earn the right to house your spirit. I remember growing pains, and they are no joke. Luckily Stoic is here to look after his son. Anybody got the small references I put in there? One of the thing I did not enjoy with the original movie was how quick Hiccup forgave the others for leaving him out. From one day to other him and Snotlout was friends. I know it was for plot purposes and passing, but not here. Here you got to earn trust. Especially with no much history and trauma. I am all for redemption, but it has to be done the right way. Chapter 9, Let Go. Summary. Hiccup throws himself off a cliff. It was his dragon's idea. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Hiccup wished that he had the ability to speed up time, and just get to the end results, because dragon training was agonizing. The shift took an enormous amount of energy he didn't have, and the feeling to force his dragon appendages forth was a grueling and sometimes painful task. And that was just listening to Mildew's lectures about it. Doing it was so much worse. But at least now he didn't hide back at the end of the line. Astrid always put herself next to him, no matter where in the line he stood. And where Astrid went, her pack of friends went as well. Fishlegs always sent him encouraging smiles, and the twins grinned at him, still asking when he was gonna blow. It was a nice alternative to getting pushed around. Well, Snotlout still pushed him once in a while, and stared hatefully at him every chance he got. Now Toothless also managed to get a growl in or two, and it rattled Snotlout enough to leave him alone for a day or more. Unless Astrid was near. Then Snotlout kept to himself. Also it helped that football season was well underway and kept Snotlout busy with training and running. Astrid has also turned out to be a whole new source of information. She still held the record for most shifted in training, but now she would tell Hiccup when he asked her for tips. She tried to explain how it felt to shift, and Hiccup would try to manifest his dragon's abilities by pure thought alone by trying to emulate the feeling she described. But still it did not help. If he managed to shift, force his wings or tails, the change hurt, and left him breathless and drenched in sweat. Nothing like the effortless shift Astrid had mastered. Those times made his growing pains worse. Mildew and the books were no use, with their 10 easy steps to become a full-fledged dragon shifter, which basically boiled down to one thing. Yell at your dragon. Utter and foremost control. Mildew would shriek to the class, spit and saliva flying from his moustache. He turned to chew out at Hiccup and his lacking progress, only for Astrid to turn her dragon eyes and scaled face at him, holding a protective arm in front of Hiccup, emitting a low, but threatening hum. Mildew would then suddenly decide it was time for coffee. Astrid would smirk proudly at Hiccup for approval, as it was clear it was not only the human preening. Hiccup would thank her politely, and wonder if he could do it without her. He felt small as she kept trying to cuddle him. A part of him enjoyed the attention, but his dragon part roared for independence. Still it was clear. Stormfly would not let any harm come to them, when she was near. She was a strongly protective Nada, linked to an even more loyal and fierce protective girl. A dangerous combo. His training time had also shrunk, now that his father was driving him to and from school, and either home or over to Gobber, where it was harder to slip out to the cove. The police chief had gotten out of his way to shift his schedule, so he could pick up and deliver his son, even if that meant he took work at later hours or at the weekend. Hiccup appreciated the effort. It was a nice change in a way to get to spend time with his father. While driving, his father would rant about Skull Crusher, and about the feeling and crushing his first boulder with his face, or smelling out a fox over a 4 miles away, or blowing fire for the first time. Hiccup ate up every word. While the talk was very one-sided, it was nice. Hiccup had talked more to his father these last 2 weeks, than what felt like years. It felt good. The way his father talked about his dragon was very different from the way his teachers did. There were control, yes, but in the way it was all about trust. And the bond. Toothless also seemed to enjoy the sound of Stoic's voice, because when the man first started about dragons, Toothless quieted to soak it all up. It had all come naturally to his father. The change, his dragon. It just fit together for him. He had not fought his dragon like Hiccup had. Fought every step of the way. Hiccup envied that. He sat in his clearing drawing dragon figures in the dirt with a stick, thinking with the pleasant mull of Toothless cooing in the back of his head. Today had been awful at dragon training. Astrid was not present, as she had some other activity she had to do, and she was so far ahead of the rest of them, that Mildew hadn't complained. That and Astrid scared Mildew shitless since their encounter in the supply closet. Without Astrid as protection, Mildew had stood for over half an hour and shooted at Hiccup, and then consequently Toothless, because Mildew addressed his dragon directly by yelling in Hiccup's face by calling him a useless, minor maggot dragon, with no chance of becoming a real shifter. To Hiccup's surprise, Toothless had yawned and ignored the man, knowing the man was baiting them to get a reaction and a dragon talent forced to the surface. Hiccup had a harder try ignoring him, and the words that still echoed in his head hours after he snuck away from Gobber's workshop. He had though felt a smoldering heat emanating from his core, getting hotter and hotter in his gut, the more Mildew talked, with the desire to spit it in Mildew's face. But his saliva had felt unnaturally hot, and knew that he would never live it down if he spit a teacher in the face. He got the same impulse now as he sat here thinking about it. This time he followed through, and spit a blob out on the ground and pushed himself from his spot. He did not notice how the spot his blob had hit started to sizzle and singe, a little smoke puff leaving it. The more Hiccup got worked up, the more it ached in his mouth, and he had to open it panting like a dog. Toothless cooed comforting in his mind, but it still did not quell all the anger. He screamed at the sky in frustration, but it came out more like a roar. Afterwards he felt better, and the aching and warmth in his gut had cooled. He ran his hand down his face, and through his hair, messing it up. "Why can't we just fly away?" he sighed defeated. He felt it more than saw it. A shiver ran through him, and he felt something spout on his cheeks. He scratched the itchy spot, and noticed scales but also small knobs on the underside of his chin. They grew more into almost frills, before growing up to his ears that had now grown into large flaps, with smaller ones right underneath. He felt the length of his face where more knobs grew from his nose and up his forehead. He felt through his hair and felt more edge scales hiding in his hair. They ran down the middle of the back of his head, down his neck and down his back and continued down. His back itched, and he had an impulse to shake his shoulder. He shrugged off his green hoodie, letting it fall to the ground before the itching was too much, leaving him in his t-shirt, jeans and boots. He rolled his shoulders and felt the weight settled and extended off his back. He knew the feeling. He didn't have to look to know their wings had faded into existence. He wiggled his butt just the tiniest bit, with encouragement from Toothless, and he felt the thump behind him as his long tail and fins landed on the ground behind him. He yawned as his teeth shifted. Not retracted, but changed shape at least. He blinked until his eyes felt normal, knowing their eyes adjusted to the dragon sight. He rolled his shoulder, as his skin crawled and round back scales washed over his hands, and his blunt round nails elongated into claws. Still blunt, but Hiccup knew the strength they hid. He took a couple of steps to help the change, and they went down his legs, making his boots sink into his skin, being replaced with more stumpy feet with toes equipped with more claws. The denim in his jeans, ragged and well-worn, melted into the dragon hide, making the transition seamless on his legs and to his tail. He felt the urge to continue, to let the shift take over, to let go. But Toothless also felt his hesitation and stopped. Hiccup blinked into consciousness, from the dreamlike state the shift had put him in. He stretched his limbs, wings and tails, and clenched and unclenched his claws, trying it out. His brain was still not quite caught up with what his eyes were seeing. His dragon eyes. He inspected his scaled arm, and turned the arm lazy. He scratched his ear, feeling his large ear flicker with the touch. They turned around, listening to the sound of the nature around him. A soothing calm ran through him as Toothless hummed content. Hiccup eyes widened as he realized. He yelled, almost toppling over, as he scrambled to get over to the lake to look at his reflection. His phone had dropped to the ground with his wallet and keys. The metal and electronic, not merging well with his dragon form. He was too distressed to notice right now as he stumbled over to the water surface. He expected to fall, but the tail did its work and kept him balanced as he wandered. Swishing from side to side behind him, having a mind of its own. Hiccup was vaguely aware that Toothless controlled that, more than him. He started down at his reflection in the rippling water. Green eyes, and a half-shifted face looked back at him, radiating the same fear and confusion as he felt. He had shifted. He had shifted. It didn't hurt. It had been natural. He had just let go. Let Toothless feel him, and then this. An almost full shift. He was just as much shifted as Astrid had. Maybe a little bit more. He hadn't forced it. He hadn't commanded the change, he hadn't even asked Toothless to change him. He just wanted to fly. It couldn't be that easy, could it? To just let the dragon decide. Meet him halfway. There had to be a trick to it. How? There had to be a catch. What? How? And Toothless had stopped. He had not been taken over by the dragon. The dragon listened to him. Hiccup chuckled disbelievingly at the reflection. Toothless chuckled with him, and Hiccup felt the dragon's pride and confidence rolled off him, and into himself. He fell back on his butt, and laughed, that turned into snorts, barks and soft roars. Toothless glee mixing with his own, only enhanced by his partner's success. Hiccup rolled around on the ground clutching his stomach. The wings and tails thumping on the ground. He had never been so happy. Wait. He hesitated and sat up. How do we fly? When he stood leaning over a cliffside, going straight down into the ice-cold sea, he rethought his life choices. He felt the anticipation and excitement, but mostly he could just feel his own fear and regret. His feet started to move on his own, Toothless eager to take the leap, but Hiccup planted his feet in the dirt, resolutely refusing to move and plummet into his minute and very near death. Toothless whined, but Hiccup fell back on his butt and shook his head, tail twitching. No. No way. Toothless pulled again, trying to get them up and away. Hiccup grabbed the tail and held it towards himself to get comfort. Nope. Too risky. Maybe we can come back tomorrow with a rope, and then try to hover a bit, Toothless snorted. No, I'm not afraid. I'm being rational. He peeked over the edge. I'm not just not ready to jump over a cliff yet. A sour feeling spread within him. And Hiccup felt offended. Of course I trust you. Toothless rumbled. I do. He gave the sea and the rocks on the shore front a look over. It's just. A warm, confident, soothing feeling washed over him, and he got up, cursing the useless reptiles. Trembling, he walked away from the edge. The wind shouted in his ears, and the smell of the ocean bore up his nostrils into his nose. Tempting. Then he sucked in his breath and ran towards the edge. He leaped into the air and over the edge, begging that he had just not made the biggest mistake in his possible very short life. He fell. The wind swooshing around him, making his eyes water, but he also felt the lightness, the happiness of his dragons and the feeling of freedom. He closed his eyes and relished in the feeling of his dragon. I'm ready, Toothless. The dragon stretched his wings and caught the wind, sending them upwards with a flick of his tail. Hiccup shouted with glee. They soared over the waves, with the winds in their hair, speeding over gulls, and other seabirds, as they danced in and out of rock formations. Tumbling, somersaulting, souring, up, finally free. Hiccup sighed, almost crying with the feeling, getting to experience this one more time, when he thought he could never do it again. A fervor built in his core, and he went with the feeling and the urge and opened his mouth, to feel something hot and cracky building up inside his mouth. He followed through and spit the energy out. A plasma bolt exploded a few meters ahead of them. Hiccup cried out, but Toothless continued to fly into the ball of melting fire. They emerged on the other side, a little soddy, but unharmed. His hair and eyebrow were intact, his skin hadn't melted off, even his unshifted clothes had made it. He laughed triumphantly, and Toothless echoed him. They flapped their wings, going higher, faster, everything. Just the two of them. When they reached the top of their climb, they filled up their lungs and roared out. All over the island the dragons stopped. The dragons turned their head towards the sound, towards the future, for what they knew was coming. Then the humans shook their heads and went about with their everyday business, wondering why they had spaced out for a moment. At home, Astrid fell down her chair, the roar, the call that still rang in her ear calling out to her to join her, shaking through her. She gripped her mouth shut, fighting to keep the roar resting on her lips inside, so she would not disrupt her parents downstairs and they would come running. But Stormfly was ecstatic, she wanted to roar, wanted to fly. Their pack had formed again. They both knew what was coming. Fish legs hurled over the kitchen sink, as molten lava and rocks hit the bottom. He coughed. That was the first time he had roared like that. But he had just felt the urge. Or more like Meatlug had. Something had changed. He spit out another rock, and wiped his mouth. Rough Nut and Tough Nut sat next to each other, still coming down from their roar. They had no idea what happened,